the 5th day of June 2022. I'm Dana Durnford. I'm also known as the nuclear proctologist.org, and we investigate forensically the nuclear industry. You can call me anytime. Just don't call me Al at 709-589-4406. How about this for your Atoms for Humanity? The A-10 Warthog only shoots dirty bombs. That should be reassuring. And then the radioactive fallout covers the whole planet shortly after. We have a poll for everybody tonight. Should smoke detectors that are mostly using evil man-made anthropogenic nuclear power plants Americium-241 be banned and recalled? We have an overwhelming 100%. That says, what? Nuclear waste in my smoke detector? By the way, you're supposed to ship the smoke detector back to the manufacturer. It's not illegal, apparently, to throw it in the dump for some strange reason. It's illegal to give it to Al-Qaeda, apparently, but not to throw it in a dump or an incinerator to liberate it into your environment. A great deal of that will come up in a little while. The military-industrial complex, which is NATO, which is 30 militaries. In fact, that's how it's described on their site. And United Nations is 195 militaries. That's the military-industrial complex they're talking about. And they have a lot of useful idiots. Here's one of them who's from United Kingdom, Dr. Jerry Thomas. She also irradiates children for a hobby and gets rid of them that way.
So, for example, coming here, I would have got a dose of 0.
Now, she's talking about she's in Japan doing a lecture and she's going to lie to the population.
So, for example, coming here, I would have got a dose of 0.07 millisieverts on the flight. And I actually went round Fukushima Daiichi on Wednesday, and the dose that I had going around the site, so very close to where the reactors are, it was 0.01 and probably lower, but that's the lowest it could actually read. So I got more of a dose flying here, and we'll get a dose tomorrow when I fly home, than I would have done from being in Fukushima.
You know, where they picked up 60 million one-ton bags. So to make that kind of claim, she should lose her degrees for that. And she definitely shouldn't be allowed to murder your children with radiation. So they had mass die-off here on the East Coast on April the 1st. That's when we first heard about it. And it wasn't an April Fool joke. I don't know of any higher body count of seabirds. There was 4 species. We went down and investigated it. It was actually a 600-mile part of the coastline. We got caught in ice storms. I slept in snowstorms. I slept through windstorms. I'm still trying to recover. There's 1,000 kinds of radioactive material you have to worry about from nuclear. So I'm trying to kind of get you who are not familiar in particular to comprehend the very basis of what we're talking about, because it's easy if you have someone explain it to you typically. So this is mainstream media are pretending they're 100 feet above the wreckage of the number 4 Fukushima reactor to your left. It's actually that they're pretending they're what's known as a fuel pool with decades of reactor cores that are typically at the top of these buildings was also lost. Chernobyl was 200 tons. Each of these reactor cores were 720 tons. And pure uranium, pure plutonium. That was reactor 4. That's the remains of reactor 3. And so the media and your so-called activists like Ernie Gunnison, Helen Caldicott, Christopher Busby have all perpetrated that deception upon you. Now, we had major radioactive fallout. This is a map from Japan. This is extremely important for the rest of the story. You can see the radiation had covered the Pacific. Now it's the Atlantic. Now it's the entire planet. This is a 16-day model based on 16 days of radioactive fallout. What we done was we launched research expeditions in the Pacific. 6 years hardcore of going from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. There's 27,000 islands. And if you visit an island a day, it would take you 71 years to visit them all. And so we went to the pinch points where the coastline, the ocean had to squeeze through pinch points to get to the interior. And we done interior. Back and forth, year after year. In a very tiny boat for a long while. This is the Intrepid. And we built the operation on an emergency species count. We've done the entire coastline of the Pacific from Vancouver, British Columbia, as I acknowledged here. And you can fill the beach up with people, and you're not going to find the species that were there previously. They're actually extinct, and after years of doing the research expeditions, we discovered the species didn't come back. The ocean didn't recede the coastline. And you can't get all the species in one picture because there was thousands of highly visible species. And to your left, you can get a little glimpse of the different species. They were exterminated because of Fukushima radioactive fallout. And all I can do is give you a very, very tiny introduction to the harm that we verified. We quantified it, verified it, documented it. These are before and after pictures in the same places. These are authentic pictures. And it wasn't always sunshine. It's a tropical rainforest. So typically it was pretty miserable, pretty tough go. And the ends of each day kind of looked like this. Okay. So tonight, because now I'll be finished moving into my new spot, which is cheaper on Tuesday, but I won't get internet until Wednesday by the looks of it. And so this is the only show. No show tomorrow or Monday or likely Tuesday. It might be. Hopefully Thursday we'll get another show and then we'll get back to normal. Summer hasn't showed up across Canada, let alone on the East Coast where I'm to. These tubes are the torpedo tubes of nuclear submarines. There's around 160 of them that are decrepit, obviously, and beached in northern Russia. And they can't decommission a lot of these. They weren't designed to be decommissioned. So we got a poll on... Now, this is outrageous they do this, by the way. Smoke detectors are using nuclear waste. And because americium has a very long half-life, it's 460 years or something. But it decays into other products that have longer half-lives on top of that. There's 10 half-lives. May cause serious health problems in case of overexposure. Never try and dismantle a smoke detector. Never try to remove the source of the americium-241. Never attempt to burn the device in order to dispose of it. It is best to return it to the manufacturer to dispose of it safely. But it's not illegal to throw americium-241 into the trash because there's no law against poisoning you with man-made radiation. Otherwise, they couldn't kill you in the hospitals. They couldn't dump it into your lakes and estuaries and streams and rivers and oceans. 'Oceans. 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 ' every year or 2 years I'll play this one little video. It's a short video. It's Jim Page from Washington. He's an activist and a musician. And it's a quick way for me to explain to you how things get changed and weaponized back against you, how the industry now has become prolific at it. And he does it with a song. You remember the song Johnny Comes Marching Home? Well, that's not the original lyrics. And this is a great video. Meet Jim Page.
Jim and I were down at the Pike Street Market one day about, 6 years ago or something, whenever it was. And a recruiter came through. And I saw him handing out little refrigerator magnets and ballpoint pens to children. 12 years old, 14 years old. I lost it. He lost it too, but he had a lot more control than I did. I completely lost it. And I almost attacked the man, and I called him a child molester. I remember calling him a child molester. I said, "You get out of here." And we ran him basically out of the market, and then Jim went down later on and actually talked with the market authorities about it, and they said, no, they're not allowed in here. So the Pike Street Market is a recruiter-free zone. Yes, indeed. Anyway, there's a great old... I'm really tired. I've been working on a recording project, and I've gotten like very little sleep for the last however long it's been. So my mind is like putty. But I remember when the shock and awe thing went over. Don't you love those words they use? Like it's like fun, like it's some kind of like game, like it's really cool to blow all these people up. Shock and awe, isn't that just it's like a disco party or something? And anyway, when I flipped. It's like I got to do something. You've got it. This is a tool. People have different tools. This is mine. David uses it too. So does George. It's like it's a tool that we use, So. We were raised with this song, When Johnny Comes Marching Home, and it's hurrah, hurrah, and everybody's, they're marching back from the Civil War. There's not a mark on them. There's no there's no post-traumatic stress. There's no wounds. Everybody's fine. The streets are lined with dogs and children and apple pies, and it's a beautiful thing. That's what we were raised on. I was raised on. Well, the song came from an old Irish folk song, which was much more to the point, and it was called Johnny, I Hardly Knew Ya, and the chorus goes, with your guns and drums and drums and guns, the enemy nearly slew ya. Oh, Johnny, dear, you look so queer. Johnny, I hardly knew ya. The guy comes back and he's not the same. He doesn't even now have all his body parts. And it's his wife talking to him, saying, who's going to take care of the children now? Who's going to keep our lives going together now? Look at what we're going to have to put you out with a bowl to beg, because it's an amazing song. It's just an amazing song. And it was an Irishman, in all fairness, who rewrote it for money, for America, to have a pro-war song so that the public sentiment could keep going. Nobody's free of this crap. Anybody can do it. They did it to their own song. Or this guy did it to his own national song. So I figured this would become our national song, Johnny Comes Marching Home. So I figured I would take it and I would rewrite it back into its original intent, but updated. I saved two of the original verses. I took out the part about hooray, hooray, or haroo, haroo, because I don't talk like that. And I'm not going to sing like I don't talk. So it's just, and it's just called When Johnny Comes Marching Home. And it goes like this. Wait a minute. Hold it. Johnny comes marching home again. When Johnny comes marching home again. When Johnny comes marching home again, we'll all go out and welcome him. Never mind the shape he's in. And we'll ask him how the fighting went. We'll ask him how the fighting went. We'll ask him how the fighting went and how he likes the president. Casualties are an accident. And we'll beat our drums and wave our flags. We'll beat our drums and wave our flags. We'll beat our drums and wave our flags with great and grand and glorious rags, the ones that put on the body bags. And later on when the sickness comes, later on when the sickness comes, later on when the sickness comes from chemicals and uranium, we'll wring our hands and we'll all play dumb. See the old veterans who did their part, the veterans who did their part. See the veterans who did their part and came back home with a purple heart, walking around with a shopping cart. See where all the legs he used to run, where all the legs he used to run, where all the legs he used to run before you went to carry a gun. Well, I'm afraid your dancing days are done. You have no arm, you have no leg. You have no arm, you have no leg. You have no arm, you have no leg. You're an armless, legless, chickenless egg. They'll have to put you out with a bowl to beg. Kill them and they'll kill us back. We'll kill them and they'll kill us back. We'll kill them and they'll kill us back. They say it's always been like that. Yeah, all for the banker and his money sack. So tip your hat and take a bow. Tip your hat and take a bow. Tip your hat and take a bow and get on with your life somehow. They're taking your little brother now.
Yeah, it's a great song. And James Lewis is right. I do play it on the guitar. I just don't sing it. I sing it, but I won't do that for anybody. Even around a campfire, my voice is just shot. Japan professor 1,000 years from now, the nuclear contaminated water from Fukushima may still be entering the Pacific Ocean. So it covered the planet. Again, let me remind you, because this is, the Pacific is now covered, North America is covered, Atlantic, now Europe, now the planet, 16 days later. And the model is not even based upon the real fallout. So worldwide, we're seeing incredible die-offs and strange events. So there's 2 minke whales up the St. Lawrence River. Now, this is where we had some recent bird die-offs I'm also going to cover. Whales don't live in rivers. Not the St. Lawrence, but the St. Lawrence River. There is a difference, because there is a St. Lawrence, which is right by me, by the way. Ailing orca floundering is an interesting way. Alien floundering, right? So they're trying to confuse you when they do stuff like that, and putting Sea Shepherd in there, who's not a reliable source, has been taken over by the industry as controlled opposition. In a French river, so you got an orca dead in the French River, minke whales in French rivers. We got lots of stories. We've covered up to 3 or 4 in 1 week of humpback whales going way up rivers. They're looking for food and they're always emaciated. Dwarf sperm whale in Bangladesh for the first time. dwarf sperm whale in Ireland coast for the first time. These are notable events, and as you start adding them all up. Now, this story came out today, just a few hours ago. Spring without pollinators. I asked everybody lately how many bees they're seeing, and the answer has been 0. And it's June the 5th, for goodness sakes. Spring without pollinators, a sign of things to come. Insect populations around the entire globe have seen an alarming decline. They claim in a few decades, but it's actually in the last 11 years. As I showed you how the radioactive plume actually works, where this model was just a xenon in a short period of time. So if you let the model continue to run the whole planet, because it's a continuous plume, it's not like it's just a plume traveling. It's a continuous plume covering the planet. Insect populations around the globe, they're small but mighty, importantly necessary. And there's been a lot of concern this spring about the cold weather. And now it has to mean that there haven't been very many small bees and other insects around the blossoms that came out on trees and bushes that give us foods. So the trees blossomed, but they weren't pollinated. In the case of farmers, our livelihood has affected everything from cherries and plum trees to blueberries and apples, and only time will tell the ultimate effect on the harvest. You got to look at the big picture 5-10 years down the road. Denmark found a precipitous drop in the number of insects hitting car windshields. And why did they put 2017? They're claimed from 1997 to 2017, but a decline of up to 97%. Well, 2017 was lots of earthquakes. On top of that, since Fukushima melted down, releasing other massive plumes that covers the entire planet. A precipitous drop in the number of insects hitting car windshields, which is something we've been talking about specifically for quite a long years. We noticed that on the research expeditions, the insects, not just the species in the tidal zones, were missing interior. And the last couple of years, we've been targeting the interior. And last year, spiders and ants in particular, we realized were missing. And it should be 150 per cubic meter and 500,000 per acre, thereabouts, right? Other ways, the scientists, and they were gone. No spider webs, because you can check the spider webs to see the insects that are in these areas. And if there's no spider webs, it's very noticeable. Other ways the scientists are measuring insect declines include the drop in larger, more visible species like birds that depend on the insects as a primary food source. Of course, not all insects are seeing their numbers fall drastically. Like mosquitoes are thriving because they don't have the predators, as I'll show you. And, like mosquitoes, there's frogs will eat it, trout will eat it, all kinds of birds, of course, will eat mosquitoes. There's all kinds of rodents and that will eat insects. They're a huge part of the food chain, so they're very prolific on breeding. Other flying insects are important pollinators. And insects like beetles are the cleanup crew eating feces and animals' remains. And habitat loss from human encroachment. Well, humans don't occupy the entire forest and planet. Radiation does, though. And radiation pulses energy at the speed of light and sterilizes the insects, the birds, the mammals, the animals. Large-scale use of pesticides and insecticides are limited. Yeah, there's large uses of it, but they're limited. You're not spraying the whole country with insecticides. You can argue, though, we are spraying huge parts of the country because of the chemtrailing. But there's a bigger picture you got to look at. Chemtrailing is certainly a part of it. Remember, they chemtrailed Vietnam for 9 years. So anybody thinks they got rid of that technology is not being realistic. Along with climate change. And climate change is radiation fallout, and it was accelerated by Fukushima. It was a huge acceleration. So think of an invisible snowstorm covering the planet, the snow never melts. And flip that to radiation. So it's an invisible radioactive snowstorm that pulses energy almost at the speed of light every few seconds, which is 186,000 miles per second. And it does that for millions of years. Coal, oil, gas emissions don't have those attributes. They also don't cover the entire planet in plumes. And they'll settle within 50 or 100 miles at best, coal, oil, and gas emissions. The only thing that'll make it into an environmental impact could be radiation is the only one. And of course it is radiation. And it all started back with the nuclear testing, which was a nuclear war. It's the same bombs. Are thought to be the big culprits. So trying to blame it on climate change. And are thought to be. This is a conjecture and an opinion. The evidence is not a conjecture and it's not an opinion. It's covered up. It's a death cult. This is something that should concern us all. We live in an environment where everything is interconnected. I lost my piece. Yeah, so insects is a primary food source, particularly for birds, right? How many insects does it take to feed hungry baby birds? So if you're not familiar with this study, I drag this up once in a while. This is from last year, or 2020, August 2020. So they had 61 nests at a country club, and they decided to monitor it with an academic study to use students to count the insects that each bird was bringing back to the nest. They consumed over 5 million insects in 61 nests in 20 days, give or take. So 720 insects per fledgling. It took 20 days before they're on their own, catching their own insects. And insects here refer to adult and larvae stages, flying and crawling species. So they had different species of birds, 4.5 million bugs for barn and cliff swallows, 810,000 for tree swallows, bluebirds, equaling 5.3 million insects totals for the birds this season for 61 nests. And each nest could have 5 or 6 fledglings, right? So 61 birds' nests needed 5.3, give or take, million insects for a 20-day from the eggs hatching to the birds being fledglings able to go out and feed themselves. The numbers reflect the importance of insects for these and many other bird species. Baby songbirds depend on insect diets throughout the world, and right now insect numbers are in a steep decline. They're in a steep decline because of radioactive fallout overdrive from Fukushima's multiple reactor buildings. Okay, so last year there was 190 species of insect-eating birds, migratory birds, that showed up emaciated. Unprecedented bird mysteriously dropping dead across southwestern U.S., and Canada. Potentially hundreds of thousands will not make their annual trip this winter after mysterious mass die-off, says the weirdo media. Maybe even millions of dead birds. It's a very large event. They're extremely emaciated. The author wasn't quoted very often, certainly not with the documentation. They have no fat reserves, barely any muscle mass, and they're flying as if till they couldn't fly no more. They include various insect-eating birds like sparrows, blackbirds, warblers, bluebirds, and they were dropping dead en masse inland. And this was an extraordinary event, and they try to blame it on smoke. They try to blame it on climate change in every story almost. Hundreds of thousands, not millions, of New Mexican birds see massive migratory dead bird die off. This was 2020. So again, they were showing up, dying everywhere. Migratory species, and it's not immediately clear why. Of course, the author that they quote had said they were emaciated. They had no muscle mass. But a lot of the media quoted her, but didn't quote the attributes she was talking about. You see, here's one of the models. It was 190 species of insect eaters that had starved to death. It's been suggested that millions of birds have died, she added. Right, it was 190 species. They try to blame it on the weather, but birds are not stupid. They're not going to fly into storms, per se, right? They go around them and over them in some cases. Observers marked 150 species at that point. Ultimately, it was 190 species. Lack of fat, muscle mass, and dehydrated as well. Of course, if you're not eating, there's no need for water typically. Scientists can't figure what's behind the New Mexico's mass bird die-offs. Majority of species collected are insectivores and long-distance migrants, flycatchers, sparrows, and everything else. Okay, so recently up the St. Lawrence River, where we just had whales go up and die, 1,000 seaboard carcasses were found on the shorelines. A lot of nuclear news tonight too. I got a hell of a lot actually. More than 850 duck carcasses, 250 gull carcasses were on the St. Lawrence Islands on the shores of the river in the middle of the eider's nesting period. And now he owned 2 islands, and he was very connected to the system, this guy. And that's what he normally will only quote. He's a professor. So right away, these are very dubious people to get your attributes from. He says, it's the first time that avian flu virus has been observed in eiders. Well, eiders are migratory, but they're migratory in many other species of birds also. So you would have found all kinds of species besides the eiders and ducks. Strain of highly pathogen avian influenza kills thousands of birds in Quebec a few days ago on the 1st. Again, they're talking about gannets, for goodness sakes, in the Magdalen Islands, which is ocean, right? By the way, I'm over right here. This is on the back of we're out in the Atlantic out here. Those islands we're talking about are only right there. And remember, we had a mass die-off. I'll show you some of that coming up down here. April the 1st, I believe it was. The carcasses of thousands of northern gannets. Now, they're the ones that fly high in the air and dive deep underwater. They're very prolific fishermen. But they also colonize as one group, but they're surrounded by the other species too. Will be very within 100 feet of them all the time. So they're claiming they're victims of highly pathogenic avian influenza. They're also claiming foxes, that has now jumped to foxes and all kinds of other species, migratory species, a lot. This is craziness. Canada, of course, has been taken over by the nuclear industry a long time ago. Remember, they had a big event in Ontario of release into Lake Ontario, drinking water for millions and millions of people, and they increased Acceptable dose is to 4,000 counts per minute in your drinking water. California recommends 15 for the tritium-3H. Serge Hubbard, a resident of Magdalen Islands, said in a recent interview, "Never seen so many dead gannets floating in the water before this season." He's a fisherman. And for the past 2 or 3 weeks, we fish 25 kilometers from the shore and we see carcasses the entire way through. So this correlates to the recent die-off of around 500,000 turs, common murres, and dovekites here on this part of the coast I'll show you coming up. Carcasses of thousands of gannets have been covering the shores of the islands for the last 2 weeks. But where's the other species? You can't just have, if it's an actual pathogen, then you gotta have the other species too. And so they're calling it highly pathogenic, which means the other species have to be there, see? It's highly pathogenic. Do you get what's going on? So they got huge die-offs going on for quite a few months here now, and they're starved to death. This is what we've seen. And they emit it for the mass die-off of the turs, the common murres, the thick-billed turs, and the dovekites, which, by the way, they eat microscopic animals. There was a bald eagle found in the the Northern Territories of Yukon. Test comes days after 2 confirmed cases of the avian flu in the territory. So, without no evidence to back up their assertions, they're claiming that the bald eagle that they found sick must have been the flu too. It is incredible dubious to do something like this. Is a big media that regurgitated that narrative. Hundreds of emaciated, immobile, of course they're emaciated, of course they're immobile, brown pelicans mysteriously appearing in California, where we've seen many, many, many die-offs. They show you healthy ones. A staggering number of brown pelicans are turning up sick and dead along the California's sunny central coast, and nobody knows why. Are you seeing any patterns here tonight? This month, the Santa Barbara Wildlife Center said they rescued more than 200 pelicans who were severely emaciated over the course of just 1 week. Found in unusual places like freeways, people's backyards. They only go in there because they can't find food in their own environment. Oh, we got a video for the Darwin Award. This guy sneaks up on a black bear and does the unthinkable. I thought it was fake when I read the story. But no. This is in Russia. He just kicked the bear.
Мне руку прокусил. Кинулся.
And then he actually moved back in close to the bear again. And then he was surprised because the bear attacked him. Court orders TEPCO to pay 73.5 million yen over Fukushima crisis, which is not very much money. Uh, 525 plaintiffs who sought 11 million per person. I ended up with a fraction of it. So that story should have been further along. I better grab that because I was moving stuff around, obviously, before I go live. No single factor identified as officials report into mass crustacean deaths. This is in the United Kingdom, the same spot about the insects. Now, the United Kingdom had some serious die-offs of whales and porpoises and mammals, seals, etc. along their coastline, around 50,000. They found around 5,500, which is about 10% of what would have died there, is how they determined that. Reporting to the cause, mass deaths of crabs and lobsters along the Teesside coast have been criticised as an utter load of tosh. The findings were just, they said, as a cover-up, is what they're basically saying. After failing to find a definitive reason for the fatalities, a number of causes were investigated, including dredging, chemicals, activities related to offshore wind farms. It's interesting how the nuclear industry is trying to blame all die-offs now on wind farms. The presence of algae blooms and diseases, which we've been showing this domoic acid being blamed worldwide, but never quantified. Disease, but no single consistent causative factor was identified. Huge piles, crabs and lobsters, began washing up on the coastline all the way back to last October, are still going on. There's another large die-off 5 weeks ago, dead crabs and lobsters, which, if I remember correctly, because we covered a lot of this over the years, we've seen these events, they were usually attributed to hypoxia, because the ocean is being destroyed by the radiation, the massive plumes of radiation, right, that were also airborne at the same time. So you're airborne and ocean plumes. So there's no way for the species to survive it. Daily in location between Hartlepool and Robbins Bay. Hartlepool and Robbins Bay. This is in the United Kingdom. Sellafield and most of our nuclear plants are on the other side. But that doesn't mean nothing when it comes to radioactive fallout, right? It covers all of Europe. Divers report dead zones a mile off Redcar with seaweed having shriveled. Now, we showed the seaweed had died all the way to Alaska, the Pacific Ocean from Vancouver to Alaska. Year after year, we showed the disintegration of these big estuary type and seabed bleached white. Bleaching, right? And we showed this whiteness for several years documented along the coastline, where originally it was just patches of the plants would have dead zones, almost invisible. You can see right through it. And so that's just the Pacific. The radioactive fallout covers the entire planet right away. But that model was 20 days. Mass Black Sea dolphin deaths could be linked to Russia-Ukraine war. So they're trying to say sonar. And right, military sonar is different than it's much more powerful. It's still, like the big shippings all use sonar. But what they're trying to claim is it causes a decompression illness, which is where, like, decompression is unique to humans. Because we take compressed air. So it's under huge pressures, 3,500 psi. where it's not just a single atmospheric pressure, right? Where an animal will just breathe in a single atmospheric, that they're designed to do, by the way. And so when you're down deep and you're breathing compressed air for quite a while, and the nitrogen in it will, because it gets compressed, it'll get into your muscle mass and your bones even. And if you come up too quick, these bubbles expand and become lodged. And they can do serious damage and cause death, right? But marine creatures don't breathe compressed air. They're actually designed, like common murre dives 600 feet for anchovies and squids and sardines and krill all day long. They're designed for whales, like sperm whales will dive a mile down all day long because they're designed for it. So if the sonar does drive them off the bottom, they don't do decompression dives. They don't stop at depths and wait for excess nitrogen. They're designed to do that, right? Scientists believe the use of the military sonar technology linked to the Ukraine war is the likely culprit. We've been covering this, though, for a decade already, particularly United Kingdom, right? Will try to blame the die-offs. They had, if this was true, because these devices which were much more intense back in the 50s when they were first starting to utilize this technology, these things were on in overdrive all the time and turbocharged all the time. We would have seen the mass die-offs, beaches of all kinds of species constantly because of the evolution of this kind of sonar has been prolific in all oceans worldwide. We wouldn't see this mass die-offs and beachings unique of, there was the pilot whales would do this, but it was a rarity. Now it's common. But all the other species are doing it, right? You're seeing up to 10 sperm whales at a time beach themselves. You're seeing mass die-offs of beaked whales. Up to 1,000 had died in just a short period in the United Kingdom. And humpback whales dying in droves in all kinds of harbors all along the migratory routes. All of them, gray whales, the same thing. And the only attribute they have in common is they're emaciated on the migratory. So, speaks for itself. More than 100 dead dolphins discovered on the Turkish coast alone. But, all along that coastline, they're seeing what they describe as an increase, which, they could be doing weapons and all kinds of stuff going on there. Dolphins have also been turning up dead along the coast of Bulgaria, Romania, Ukraine since the start of the war. Now in the 4th month suggests that as many as several thousand dolphins were killed in the regions. Well, it wouldn't be just the dolphins, right? And they won't run towards the noise. They'll run away from the noise if it's affecting them. But we expected to see headlines like that because of NATO's, that's a NATO war. It's not Ukraine war, it's NATO. NATO's arming Ukraine, right? And surrounding countries. Researchers suspect that noise pollution from the warships' powerful sonar devices could be interfering with the dolphins' echolocations. This sonar is not new to the dolphins. All dolphins alive today were born into that environment. It's normal for them. It's not normal, but it's normal for any dolphin alive today because the technology has been around for so long. There's no dolphins alive today that were alive when there's no sonars, is what I'm saying, right? They would have ran away from it. Dolphins become disoriented, cannot find their prey, resulting in starvation. So they died of starvation, thousands of dolphins. They're trying to blame it on the sonar. But then we're seeing this worldwide, not just in the Black Sea. Dolphins have been struggling to hunt for food. So, and this is normal in media where you got to go right to the last couple of paragraphs. You got to read every paragraph and every sentence, and then you find out they starved to death. And all the species we seem to have come across that the food chain has been destroyed, in very poor health on top of that, which is starvation, emaciated. Because sometimes they call them thin or skinny, which is emaciated. And then they also throw in the killer whales. Yeah, but the killer whales didn't drive 1,000 dolphins onto the beaches to die. Or we've been seeing that for decades. It would be true for decades, see? It's not something new. But, I'm not saying the killer whales are not out there predatory on the dolphins, because a lot of their normal species have already died. I'm just saying we would see it worldwide if it was true, right? NOAA is warning of aggressive dolphins off the Texas coast. Swimming children and pets are being cut off from their parents, which is a hunting technique, right? Their biologists reported the dolphins intentionally separated children from their parents and pets from their owners in the water. April the 1st, Newfoundland, we're on to currently. Birds are dying by the hundreds in western Newfoundland. Seabird experts want to know why. They try to blame it on 200 miles of pack ice. Explain it to you. It's a very short story, unfortunately. Reports range from tens to hundreds at various locations. Reports of dead or dying turs and dovekites. Well, the turs, they eat anchovies and squid, sardines and capelin, 8-9-inch fish. The dovekites eat microscopic animals. Two completely different spectrums of the food chain, which is what you expect to see in an extinction event. Reports of dead or dying turs, dovekites. There was actually 4 species, the common murres, thick-billed turs also. They say they don't have a higher body count. Scientists calling for help determine the extent of the bird deaths. We launched research expeditions. This was the reports of the dying of the birds. It was over 600 kilometers of the coastline. Now, they were saying that the ice pack was 200 miles off the coastline, all the way to the coastline, and the birds couldn't find any food, were trapped on the coastline, and had starved to death. But they were blowing up in all the communities, but they were supposed to be migratory towards the Arctic, not towards here. So we went down, we got caught in snowstorms, we got caught in ice storms. You can see the trees here covered in ice. Everything is actually covered in ice, you probably can't discern it. But the ice pack along the coastline was at best a half a kilometer. And we covered a huge section of the coastline in adverse conditions, I might add. Which reminds me, we got a poll tonight. I'll jump on that in 1 second. So I'll put this on the other screen so we can... Americium-241 smoke detector precaution. So they have a little piece of americium, and I guess when stories come up, we'll explain that later on. They're using nuclear waste in your smoke detectors, folks. It's pulsing energy every second, it's decaying. And if you got children and pets and animals in proximity to these things, they're getting little bits of this will break off into the environment. I got to check and see if there's any kind of protection. Probably tomorrow. It's best to return it to the manufacturer. Most people didn't know you're supposed to return your smoke detector to the manufacturer a bit. Because it's nuclear waste. Even though it's not illegal to throw the nuclear waste in your trash, to be incinerated, liberated into the environment for 4,600 years. Okay, so that's the story there. I probably lost the piece. A court ordered TEPCO to pay $73 million. Just $566,000. $566,000 to 525 plaintiffs, which is roughly $1,000 each, for losing their homes, their lives, their futures, and being poisoned. Claiming west of the complex, Koriyama branch of the Fukushima District Court recognizes the plaintiffs' claims that they were anguished by losing joy, such as picking nearby wild plants. You can't live there. It's death sentence for illnesses and diseases on top of that. And forging community ties, but dismissed the case against the state. First off, they said there was no way they could know a tsunami was that big was going to come in. But of course, that's why they had tsunami walls all along the coastline, because that's exactly what they knew could happen. And they have 3,000-year history of it happening, and they have that marked out for tourist guides on top of that. This was an unusual shot of the plant, not a very clean picture. That's actually reactor 5 and 6 right here. Remember, that was pixelated in pictures released last year, 736 pictures. In my playlist, I actually done a presentation on those pictures. These pictures were all from a drone. You had to zoom in on it, and then you realized all the reactors were pixelated, but also reactor 6 was pixelated, and the common spent fuel pool was pixelated also. And so was most of this stack right here was pixelated. And so it was very dubious of why they released it in the first place, because every picture of the reactors in 736 pictures was redacted, but you couldn't see that until you zoomed in. So they were trying to warn us, there's no doubt about that. And if you've never seen that presentation, it's worth watching. And I did put a link below that video so you can download the pictures. It's from a Chinese site. But nobody actually talked about that until, like, actually come out with a video and went through the pictures. Nobody's ever done that. I'm the only person to ever do it. And you notice in this picture here, that's reactor 1. Reactor 2 is right behind it. The remains of 4 reactors are visible, but it's not a very good picture, all things considered, in the first place. This is one they took from their helicopter, I believe. I zoomed around trying to see if I can notice anything new. It looks like they're storing canisters in the ground here. I can't quantify that right now without the map that I got. It's very unusual to see reactor 5 and 6. That angle, that's a very, very, very unusual picture. And those stacks over by reactor 3 and 4 in particular are around 25 sieverts. They're lethal doses. It was very difficult for the state to foresee the magnitude of the tsunami that hit the plant when they have a 3,000-year history of giant tsunamis hitting those areas way above it. They built tsunami walls all along the coastline because they were bored, Dana. Yeah, that's what I thought too. Even if the government had exercised its regulatory authorities and TEPCO take countermeasures, could not have been possible to prevent the tsunami from triggering the accident because they built it in an area where it shouldn't be built it. It's as simple as that. And the judge said awarding 2 million yen to each plaintiff. And given that the plaintiffs have received compensation in the form of monthly consolidation fees of 100,000 yen, which is roughly 968 Canadian, from TEPCO through August 2012, the court ruled that most of the damages awarded in the rulings have already been paid. So that's how you discourage anybody else from launching lawsuits, right? The nuclear reactor meltdowns at the nuclear complex and sent plumes of radioactive material into the air. Some areas of Tamura sit within a radius of 20 to 30 kilometers from the plant and were designated as emergency evacuation preparation zones. The next month, In the event of a worsened situation, the designation was lifted in September 2011. Similar cases were filed across Japan accusing the company and the government of negligence over safety concerns. And so the lawyers led them down a one-way road on purpose, no doubt. The energy in nuclear waste could power the US for 100 years, but the technology was never commercialized because you can't do it. So this was written by the nuclear industry, and then they put their name on it to get their kickback in as a journalist. This is how a journalist makes money now, is they promote lies and deceptions, misrepresentation, deceit, dishonesty. There's enough energy in the nuclear waste in the United States to power the entire country for 100 years, and you can't call nuclear clean energy. You're a kooky whack job. Says whack job from the Idaho National Laboratory. You'd have to be insane to trust somebody from the Idaho National Laboratory. They actually sit on one of the biggest aquifers in the United States that is incredibly radioactive, and the drinking water from that ends up in millions of homes nearby. It's disgusting because we see that at all of these laboratories. Several private nuclear innovation companies are developing commercial fast reactors, which are illegal in Canada and the United States, by the way, namely Oklo and Terra Power. So why are they developing fast reactors when they're illegal? Do they know something we don't know? I bet you they do. But even still, there are supply chain issues in the United States for producing the fuel that goes into the fast reactors. But Terra Nova is trying to build one in Europe, right? Not in America, because it's illegal in America for those particular fast reactors, which are how you produce plutonium, by the way. And you got to use mixed oxide fuel. That's why I'm saying that. Doing so could help solve the thorny political fraud problems of managing spent nuclear waste. Again, this is an insider's. So they take the old fuel, reclaim uranium, plutonium, other fission hot particles, and they make fuel rods out of that and put it into a reactor, and it actually releases a lot of it into the environment. Now, when you take it out of the reactor as spent fuel the next time, like originally, the radioactive particles are 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison after they went through their first cycle. Try wrapping your mind around that. 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. So when you take it out of the reactor again, you enhance that by another billion. But when you put it in a pool to cool down for a decade, it's still splitting the atoms of this incredible lethal isotopes into the environment. It's the worst case scenario when it comes to nuclear releases into the environment. It's an incredible betrayal. It's a despicable betrayal. And it's perpetrated by the schools of mass destruction known as your universities. Jesse Geehan from the Idaho National Laboratory. There's an increased urgency to address climate change. Now, this is cooked up by Paris Accord, pro-nuclear community, which is what the Paris Accord was. And then climate scientists which is a new category, right? Fairly new category at universities, was created to promote nuclear. And that's what you see them doing constantly, of course, to address climate change by decarbonizing out energy grids, and nuclear power has become part of clean energy. Of course, this is ludicrous to suggest that nuclear, first off, you need 2 external coal, oil, or gas plants just to run a nuclear power site. Fundamentally, in light water reactors, out of the uranium we dig out of the ground, we use 0.5% of the energy in the uranium that's dug out of the ground. And what they mean by that is we turn it into fuel, put it in a reactor. Once we fire it up, we only use 0.5% of the fuel. And the reason is that the fuel rods have trillions and trillions of microscopic cracks. Very, very, very vulnerable They're very toxic. They're very energetic. If you take them out, it's a lethal dose immediately to anybody in a short distance. And what I mean by that, say several dozen feet, it's an instant death sentence. And if you got a lot, I'm just talking about a small piece of it. Like if you took a cupful of it after it's gone through a chain reaction and put it in McDonald's, it'll kill everybody in McDonald's every 20 minutes. So every 20 minutes you can clean out McDonald's and fill it up with people, kill all of them in 20 minutes. Anywhere in the building, it'll kill everybody. It'll do that for millions of years. Just a Dixie cup full of this stuff. Fast neutron reactors can more effectively convert uranium-238 to plutonium so you can fission it. And plutonium is named after the devil, of course. Nuclear energy as a whole started falling out of favor largely because of the nuclear accident at 3 Mile Island in 1979. It should have fell from favor in 1959 at Santa Susana, which released 460 times more radiation than 3 Mile Island did, right? They hid that, same as they hid Sellafield, same as they hid Chalk River for decades and decades. The government is moving slowly. Startups like Oklo and TerraPower and energy giant Westinghouse are working on fast reactor technology. Now, the big problem with that, of course, is that between 2020 and 2026, renewable energy, wind, solar, etc., there'll be around 4,800 gigawatts online by 2026 in the next 4 years from 2020, which is equal to 5,500 large nuclear reactors, the animosity equivalent of energy, but in renewables in just 6 years. So in 6 years, can you build 5,500 nuclear power plants? No. In 6 years, can you build 5,500 nuclear power plants worth of renewable energy? Piece of cake. Because it's cheaper each year by large margins, and the technology is doubling every 18 months. So they're showing you this control room at Idaho National Laboratory. And like really, whoopee friggin' do. Whoopee. For now, the Idaho National Laboratory can process enough fuel for research and development. That's the only one with the license in the United States, by the way. This is mixed oxide fuel they're talking about. But TerraPower says it's investing in a supply chain, working with elected leaders to build political supports to change the law to use mixed oxide fuel. And why Oklo has received 3 government awards for something that's not supposed to be doing is working with the government for something that is illegal to commercialize fast reactor fuel supply chains domestically. So this is how they get around. It's illegal to use it, but they get licenses to produce the fuel. And then it's a conversion at any reactor to start using the fuel rather than storing it. But if you don't store it, it's still splitting the atom. So it's constant releases, an incredible amount of releases. And as you start building up decades of reactor cores at all the nuclear power plants, they're all splitting the atom all day long into the environment. The same atoms you need to power 1 million homes. So there's worldwide is 440 reactors, and say they all power 1 million homes. But each day, instead of that power being recycled between neutrons and protons inside the reactor, it's in a fuel pool with no containment. So it's still splitting the same atoms each day. That's released into the environment. But it's like a snowstorm where the snow never melts, except it's radiation, and you can't see it or smell it or hear it or taste it or feel or touch it or pick it up or whatever. But the insects, the birds, the mammals, the animals, and everything with replicating cells are extremely vulnerable. And the first thing to do is start sterilizing all of those species and the humanity. And now we're at the upper end of this cycle where there's so much on the planet. The planet is now permanently polluted for millions of years. and they're still trying to proliferate more of it. It's some kind of weird sickness and illness and disease. They're like alcoholics that can't stop drinking. They're nucaholics. They can't stop murdering all the species on the planet. Small reactors may, and this was Wired. So we covered this last week, but Wired didn't cover the actual information. I'll explain it to you. Small reactors may still have a big nuclear waste problem, which is a story that came out from a study from Stanford. By many measures, small modular reactor design produces not less, but potentially much more waste than more than 5 times the spent fuel per unit of power, as much as 35 times for other forms of waste. But what they actually said in the original story, mini nuclear power stations may produce more waste than large ones, was 35 times more compared to large conventional reactors when looking at waste produced per unit electricity generated. For long-lived equivalent waste, small modular reactors produce 30 times more, and for spent fuel times, 5 times more. So 35 times more medium, intermediate level waste was omitted from Wired version. Startups seeking licenses to build small modular reactors designs disputed the findings, saying they're prepared for whatever waste is generated. Really? And you're not prepared for the waste you've already generated. How can you be prepared for the waste that's generated? You got no solution from 70 years of waste. Hanford wants another $700 billion on top of who knows how much they've already spent there. It's a ludicrous assertion to claim that they're prepared for whatever waste is generated. It's a garbage can diagnosis. The point of the paper is to prompt a discussion. This is Alison McFarlane, who we've called out many times when she was working for the Non-Regulatory Commission. She now works at a British Columbia University as a professor, when she lied to British Columbia for several years when she was with the NRC, the Non-Regulatory Commission. Nuclear technology could supply clean energy to base Petawawa here in Canada. Nuclear technology could, again, this is a conjecture, right? Feasibility studies indicate a small modular reactor could reduce the carbon footprint. This is a ludicrous assertion of the 4th Canadian Division Support Base. Canada's got 3 nuclear submarines. They're all at the West Edmonton Mall, and it costs $2 to go down and play on them. By over 40% help beat the Department of National Defense's emissions reductions. Department of Defense. First off, these bases are one great big carbon producing per se resource intensive facilities. Carbon is good for animals and plants and insects and birds and whales and everything else, by the way. Trees. But Chalk River. Should have known, right? Chalk River's nearby. I didn't realize that. I think we covered it before, but I can't remember specifically. Chalk River is one of the first meltdowns on our planet, still melting down into the river that runs past Ottawa, all the way down to St. Lawrence, by the way. According to the recent studies completed by the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, which is a private organization, mostly run by Americans, in Canada, under a memorandum of understanding between the Department of National Defense. You know how much resources they use just for their toys, for their stupid airplanes and their stupid tanks and their stupid drills? And the Atomic Energy of Canada Limited. The Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, who raised the limit to 40,000 becquerels per litre of drinking water after a nuclear accident in Ontario, and it's finally down to 7,000 becquerels per litre of tritium-3H, whereas in California is 15. Europe is 100. They're poisoning everybody. This is the same atomic energy of Canada that lifted all the restrictions on food imports from Fukushima nuclear wasteland, the entire country, after 93 days. "55 countries, not just from Fukushima, but 14 prefectures banned it. Canada lifted all restrictions after 93 days. Nobody else would take it, so Canada poisoned everybody. The atomic energy of Canada did. And the schools of mass destruction in Canada, the universities. Specifically, the study examined the feasibility of providing energy, electrical, thermal, from a small modular reactor located at Chalk River National Laboratories. Dirty little devils teamed up with the military rapist machine to achieve several goals for Petawawa, including reaching net zero. And of course, net zero is Miles Allen, right? He never stops with this creeps. Miles Allen done a study, and then that was snatched up by UN, and that's been regurgitated by 195 militaries ever since. The father of net zero is Miles Allen. He wrote a paper, and now everybody on the planet is being demonized because he wrote a paper. He's got a nice cushy job from UN after, of course. Established in 1905, this military-industrial complex has 400 buildings and 7,000 stupid uniforms. As soon as they put the uniform on, they become idiots. They're non-humans for some reason when they put that uniform on. They're better than everybody. They're got a ticket to rape and murder. Now they're happy. Scientific, they're not soldiers, they're puppets. They can't even quit. It's the stupidest thing imaginable. Significant growth is expected at the base in coming years. Why? Martial law? What? Why would you be significant? The Canadian military is a joke. It's literally a joke. Petawawa, there's not a country on the planet is worried about Canadian military. Not one. They're just puppets for United Nations or NATO. They're not a military, they're a thug game of rapists. Petawawa is one of the Canadian Forces' most active bases with 400 buildings. No, they just suck the money out, and then the people that need it got nothing. And the soldiers, they get dirt cheap pay on top of that. They're shit on constantly. They're not even soldiers. Well, the electrical energy needs for the base could be met through a combination of solar. Yeah, and they got put battery storage. Why would you put battery storage in when you can have compressed air storage? Costs you next to nothing compared to batteries. It already exists. You can scale it up to any size you want, and you can use pumped hydro. So if you have wind and solar backed up with geothermal and tidal energy backed up with pumped hydro and compressed air storage is just digging tunnels, excess energy, you compress air down to the tunnels at 120 psi. Do it anywhere. Why would you do batteries? The small modular reactors that don't exist, used for the study, that using stuff that don't exist, was a generic high temperature reactor. See, you can't use small modular reactors in a study when it doesn't exist and you can't quantify any of those assertions again. Small modular reactors has the potential to make a significant contribution to, look, if you put half the effort that you're putting into small modular reactors into renewable storage, problem would be solved. It's stupid simple to come up with a solution. They just refuse to even try. Reducing greenhouse gas emission, get rid of the stupid, useless, pointless, mass rapist military. What the fuck do you need that for? What do you need these bunch of fucking loafers for? And meet net zero goals. So who wrote this? The Atomic Energy of Canada, no doubt. Is a federal crown corporation with a mandate to drive nuclear opportunities for Canada. So until you get rid of the Atomic Energy of Canada, you'll never get rid of nuclear. Because they're a federal crown corporation that don't have any laws that apply to them when it comes to nuclear. It's not illegal for them to poison you. That is one of the biggest crimes in human history. With a mandate to drive nuclear. Working with the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. Atomic Energy of Canada's limited nuclear science and technology and manages the Government of Canada's radioactive responsibilities. Really? You manage the waste responsibilities. When? When? At what point? You were given something like $28 billion 20 years ago. You still don't even have all your scientists and academics and universities got together, and the best they can come up with is dig a hole in the ground. Again, what's the point of these people if it's not to exterminate everything and destroy everybody's future? Why would you have a system like this and talk about the word net zero? And net zero is what? And manage the Government of Canada's radioactive waste responsibilities. This is an absurd suggestion that they have anything to do with it. They've never even tried. About Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. With a strong safety culture. Underscores every activity. Pure brainwashing. Patrick Quinn, the degenerate of degenerates. What about nuclear? Why bother when renewables now are dirt cheap, are quick and easy, are applicable anywhere? The technology is obsolete, the equipment is obsolete. 2 words are missing from the Charles Lane's May 26 Thursday opinion column. We should have read inconvenience, if partial, truth about the decarbonizing the economy. What are you talking about decarbonizing the economy? Now, we've been covering this every day for years and years and years, this fable of decarbonizing. This lunatic of decarbonizing. I'll explain it to you. Because they're trying to say coal, oil, and gas emissions does this. The only thing that does that is radioactive fallout. And it just floats around the environment, continuous plume. It's surreal. Pulsing energy every second. Everything that breathes it in, drinks it or consumes it from bioaccumulation, ends up sick and deteriorating and eventually dying from the exposures. But it heats up the planet. It pulses energy every second. It covers, this model's only 20 days. It covers the entire planet. Pulsing energy every second. To be sure, anti-nuclear political opposition deserves to be not only heard but respected. In fact, justifying a still more stringent oversight of the industry. Like, you can't put the genie back into the bottle that you already released into the environment. The demonic genie has set the stage now for an extinction event. The industry is nothing but inbreeds of inbreeds on top of that from the industry. Anti-nuclear political opposition, anti-nuclear. Arguing for the indispensability of fossil fuels and imperative ingredients in society's well-being and economic growth without even a side glance at a place for the atom strikes me as literally breaking news. Joel from Chevy Chase. Just go to Fukushima reactors and fix them so we don't have to listen to you no more. So we got a poll tonight. Of course, the industry is freaking out because we're talking about smoke detectors. Americium-241 smoke detector precautions may cause serious health problems in case of overexposure. While using this device, the following points should therefore be kept in mind. Never try and dismantle the smoke detector. Don't try to remove the sources of 241 americium. Don't open up a food cart in front of nuclear universities and take a whole bunch of americium from a whole bunch of smoke detectors, grind it up, and cook that food and give it away free to the nuclear students, because you'll make them all sick and die. It is best to return it to the manufacturer. So your smoke detector should be returned to your manufacturer because it's radioactive. But because there's no laws, makes it illegal to poison you with radiation. The Congress doesn't have the authority on top of that to make it illegal to poison you with radiation. Only the non-regulatory commission could do that, and there's zero chances that these appointed little Muppets are ever going to do that. These destructive, hateful, planet-murdering insects, parasites I should say. It's not illegal to throw your americium-241 smoke detector into the trash. Look, anything that should be returned to the manufacturer because it's toxic, so toxic, qualifies as evil man-made nuclear americium-241, should be banned and recalled. Should smoke detectors use an evil... Now, some way the industry freaked out. We got 9% says no. It shouldn't be banned and it shouldn't be recalled. Ain't that interesting? Imagine how pathetic those people actually are. Influential Ontario Tech nuclear science researcher reappointed as the Canadian Research Chair. So another useful Muppet who won't go to Fukushima. Him and it's really interesting, isn't it? I'll explain what I mean by this. I got a great way of explaining stuff like that. Once I get there, bear with me. The problem with what I do is you can't rush it. You have to be methodical about it. So that person over there with the blue tie on, Dr. Marcus Pyro, is a leading national expert who researches nuclear fuel and material. So he's a misery machine, him and his crew. Does anybody think that he's going to tweet out that picture there and say, look, they're faking being in Reactor 4 building to the right, and here's what it looks like on the left? Does anybody think Marcus to your left is going to tweet out that picture? Is there anybody on the planet gullible enough to think that he's honest? No. He's reappointed because he hates humanity. He wants to proliferate evil nuclear on our planet. He's not willing to acknowledge the deception, deceit, and dishonesty already. He's not willing to say it was wrong to import food after 93 days from a nuclear meltdown country, let alone all the other prefectures. Goodbye, scumbag. Ukraine power operators deny report and may turn off Russia-held nuclear plant. Ukraine power operators. Well, first off, that country's under martial law. My opinion was they should have surrendered rather than have Russia come in, blow everything up, and destroy all the infrastructure, displace millions of people, destroy the future of the country, the legacy, the harmony of the country. But that was the agenda. That was 100% agenda to cause inflation worldwide. Every country worldwide, every NATO country, every United Nations country said, well, we're not going to touch Russia's resources. We're going to do it on our own. The price of everything skyrocketed, and the victims of society I know parents out there right now can't afford to go pick their children up at school anymore because the price of gas has gone insane. That's just one. Everything has gone insane. The plants cannot be turned off from a technical, security, economic, or political point of view. So if they have an event and a view shows the damaged building at a nuclear power plant compound amid Russia's invasion. Well, this is an administration building quite far away from the reactors themselves. They wouldn't give up the plant, so they fired on it, on the administration facet of it. If they want to melt down the reactor, they just cut the external power supply and she melts down within 50 minutes. In a statement, Euratom said, because they run on external power, I'd like to see the light bill for these power plants each year. You can imagine what that is. They need 2 dedicated external power supplies to run a nuclear power plant. It's a huge bill each year. In a statement, Euratom said the plants can't be turned off from a technical. It takes a long time to shut down a plant anyway. Déjà vu, coping with conventional aggression in a nuclear context. Foreign Policy Research Institute, Foreign Policy Research, part of the military-industrial complex, wrote the article. Feds see a need to increase nuclear waste cleanup funds. So Senator Inslee, talking about Hanford, recently criticized the slow pace of the cleaning up of Hanford Nuclear Reservation. Criticized the slow pace of the day workers. The nuclear universities don't work at Hanford. Nuclear companies are not working there. Local companies start up little companies to get a job there. It's the locals that work there, not nuclear academics, not nuclear students. Toward the former weapons complex on Thursday said more federal money is needed to finish the job. You actually won't be able to finish it. You'll never clean up Hanford. Created more than 2/3 of the nation plutonium for weapons, nuclear weapons, including atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki. That apparently they didn't need to drop on top of that. It was mostly a civilian population. Left behind was the most contaminated nuclear site in the nation at that time. But who knows how they're trying to frame it in that particular paragraph. They want another $3.76 billion this year would help meet legal obligations, including court-ordered cleanup deadlines they long since passed. We need the federal government to step up to the plate and do its job. It's an environmental justice issue. It's 580 square miles. Much of the waste is stored in 177 aging underground tanks. That's simply not true. They have 41 miles of unlined trenches there. They've dumped tens of billions of gallons in the 50s and 60s directly into the hillside of the Columbian River. So it all runs down to the river, and what didn't gets washed down the next time it rains. Some of which are leaking. The tanks were only made the last couple of years. They're all leaking. The tanks are 50, 60 years old. The heavy fuel in the waste, the nuclear, this stuff that we're talking about settles in the tank. Neutrons and protons and everything are bombarding each other. You got a chain reaction in the tanks. The tanks are not full of boron or anything like that. So you have a chain reaction starts in the tank, burns a hole through the tank, and then the tank empties. Tanks are, say, 100 feet high. Well, that's 3 atmospheres of pressure. In other words, that's 40 or 50 pounds of pressure on so-called a leak, a hole, which means it's just going to hemorrhage out of those tanks. It's long gone into the ground, the majority of it. Calling it leaking is an absurd downplaying of it. It's a 580 square mile, 1,500 square kilometer nuclear wasteland. Inslee wrote the budgets needed to be far higher to avoid disaster, meet a legal obligation, prevent the cleanup from continuing until as late as the year 2178. Another 156 years. 156 years, if not longer, to clean up the site. 156 years. Billions and billions and billions of dollars for each site. At all the national laboratories are the same thing. The earliest possible date for cleanup continues to extend further into the future. The harms to the surrounding communities, danger of catastrophic impact to the Pacific Northwest, which has been going for 70 plus years, because they've been dumping it into the Columbia River, it runs right down to the Pacific Ocean. In a worst case scenario, cleanup of Hanford might not be completed for another 150 years or possibly never. He points out Hanford's older single-walled storage tanks are between 58 and 78 years old, which exceeded their design lifespan of 20 to 30 years. But if I followed this for many years, the original idea of the tanks was just a couple of years. It was supposed to be just a quick solution, and they were going to come up with solutions. Of course, as soon as you hear them say that, it means get lost. We're going to do whatever we want. We don't care if we kill the planet. We're just going to do whatever we feel like. Because it's just a despicable industry. At least 2 of those tanks are known to be leaking. 2. Like, if I found media telling the truth, I'd probably retire. We do this because all you do is lie. There's no accountability for lying on top of that. It's encouraged. Oh, it's the agenda. All the lobbying, nuclear lobbying, are writing the articles and they're just publishing it in their media to get a kickback. They build up an audience on cat videos and garbage and salacious stuff, and then they feed them stuff like this. In addition, the tunnels storing highly contaminated equipment partially collapsed. Partially. Is that like leaking, I wonder? And it collapsed the second, we covered all of these, by the way, and the second waste tunnel was diverted at great expense. All they done was they put so-called grout in these tunnels. The workers were wearing Scotty backpacks and actual hazmat suits, whereas Fukushima, they're using paper suits and paper masks because it's homeless and destitute. If the idea of investing in a cleanup today is unpalatable, consider this. Whether calamity comes in the form of releases of radiation, groundwater contamination reaching the Columbia River. There's a spot on the Columbia River at over 70 sieverts an hour. If you're in a fishing boat and you drift past it, you'll probably die that night. For years, they dumped it directly into the Columbia River. You'll never get that river clean. They've dumped so much into the ground and into the hillsides on both sides of the river. The name evil, it doesn't really do it justice for what they've been doing and continue to do. And their children will get an education to get the job to cover up their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents' crime. And that cycle now is the new norm. The current generation of the nuclear industry are the inbreeds, the inbreeds of the inbreeds. And they know it. They're what we call the entitled lot. They think they're supposed to kill all the species and all of humanity, because that actually makes sense when you look at what they're up to. Right? That makes sense. Nothing else actually makes sense, but that actually makes sense. Harmful exposures to workers at the homeless at the site, or something else, the bill will eventually come due, he wrote. Each year, the Hanford is underfunded, adds 18 months to 3 years to the cleanup timeline. The taxpayers' dollars ends up being spent on maintaining the aging facilities and responding to emergency infrastructure failures. So if the industry had to pay their own bills, they would have been bankrupt a very long time ago, and we wouldn't be in this problem. The only reason we're having this problem is because we fund everything. They don't put any money aside for. They know this is going to happen. They run on profit only, and even worse, a lot of these companies are on the stock exchange, so you can never get rid of them. They're truly a plague on our society and the species, and they have now jeopardized the future of civilization permanently. We have destroyed the future for sure. Even if we stopped all nuclear now, the amounts that have been released into the environment, the dumping into the oceans, the nuclear testing, the nuclear fuel pool emissions have doomed the planet. The slower, but we gotta fight back. We gotta have a conversation. The only way we're gonna come up with solutions is to admit you got a problem. Until you're willing to admit you got a problem, you're not gonna come up with solutions, or even band-aids. The slower this pace goes, the more it's going to cost American taxpayers. The longer it goes, the less money for infrastructure and schools and hospitals and real issues. In Chernobyl, delicate nuclear labs, Russians looted the safety system. Probably done it themselves. 698 computers were destroyed. 344 vehicles. Wait till you get a load of this. 15, so you got, let me do it again to you. 700 computers, 350 vehicles, 1,500 Geiger counters, irreplaceable software built specifically for the site, almost every piece of firefighting equipment, and a list of what Russia's occupying forces stole, blew up, or riddled with bullets in and around Chernobyl laboratories is still being compiled. The site of the world's worst nuclear disaster. How can you call a 200-ton reactor worse than 720-ton reactors in Japan that were destroyed at the top of Chernobyl? Was a new reactor, 200 tons. Mostly graphite, for goodness sakes. Fukushima is pure uranium, pure plutonium, but is 4 decades old, had decades of reactor cores at the top of the buildings that don't even exist. They were gone too. And apparently the common spent fuel pool and reactor number 6 had lost their inventories. According to the documentation from January of last year, released by TEPCO, like they do this, when you see the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster, and then you put in, very rarely you see them use that connotation, but they're just telling you when it happens, see? And that's the Washington Post. We expect that from the Washington Ghost. I cannot say that they have caused damage to mankind, but certainly great economic damage to Ukraine. Of course, how can you not cause damage to mankind? Like when they fire their tanks and everything down there, the blowback from that alone, just the air from the launching of the missiles or whatever, they disturb a huge amount of topsoil, and that's, you're going to liberate long-lived radionuclides back into the environments. Before the invasion, nearly 6,000 workers still monitored the meltdowns more than 3 decades ago, as get a load of that, as well as processing spent nuclear fuel from other plants in Ukraine and Europe, were shipping their fuel to Chernobyl, where there's 6,000 employees making mixed oxide fuel. That's unbelievable. Disgustingly unbelievable. Despicably unbelievable. Revoltingly unbelievable. The despicable nuclear industry. You disgusting parasites. You revolting parasites. You hideous parasites. Unbelievable. You stupid morons. You greedy, self-centered, arrogant, hubris, pompous pricks. In the days before the invasion, all but a few hundred employees were evacuated, often not resting for days while trying to keep the station safe and systems running. So that tells you how fragile Chernobyl still is. 6,000 people working there, making spent MOX fuel. Unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Too bad Russia didn't bomb it. Fuck it. Excuse the language. And there's down 200 tons of lava-like nuclear fuel. 200 tons. Each of Fukushima reactors is 720 tons. They're completely gone. They're completely gone. There's nothing left. No fuel pools, no reactors, no nothing. Multiple reactors gone. And abandoned dogs. I've worked here since May the 1st, he said. And everything that I worked for 30 years was spoiled and plundered. Well, you're there making misery machines known as spent fuel, taking spent fuel and turning it into MOX. Ukrainians have decided not to refill the trenches dug throughout the exclusion zone by Russia's. They believe radiation emissions to be low there. Well, how can it be low? You contaminated over 9,000 farms in Ireland and Scotland and the United Kingdom. How can it be low right there? And the worst damage would be to the lungs of the soldiers who inhaled radioactive dust for weeks during the occupation. Well, you only got to inhale a few particles and end up sick for the rest of your life. So they all would have got sick. And they're disposable. They're military. They're considered disposable. The real risk is from forest fires as summer approaches. All equipment they would have to use to fight them is now gone or unusable. So all the forest fires have huge radiation fallout across the world, but certainly Europe, because of forest fires anywhere over in that area, certainly let alone Ukraine. And Ukraine is the breadbasket for a lot of impoverished countries, for goodness sakes. Imagine taking a nuclear wasteland, turning it into a breadbasket. That's what Japan is also doing right now. Russia pauses a nuclear safety cooperation with Norway. I got to go to the big screen for that, or the little screen for that. Russia and Western neighbors share a coastline in the Barents Sea, have a common interest in avoiding radioactive leakage. So they use the words leakage or leak. It drives me insane. Some of the largest rundown dump sites for radioactive waste spent nuclear fuel from the Soviet-era submarines are stored some 60 kilometers from the land border with Norway. Russia, though, has never informed Norway about any accidents involving military reactor installations, like the deadly July 2019 fire to nuclear power special mission submarine Loksharkit. Oh yeah, we covered that in the waters off Kola Peninsula. No information was given either when a nuclear power weapons systems exploded in the White Sea. We covered that. Later the same year, killing 5 Rosatom experts, which was a great day for humanity, and sending a cloud of radioactive gas over the city. I can't pronounce the name, so I'm not going to try. The plume doesn't just cover a city and stop. When you have an event at Arriva Bay, we'll get to that. The first shipments of spent fuel from the storage tanks took place in 2017. This was an old Soviet nuclear submarine offloading fuel base. And so it was stuffed with fuel. The Soviet Gorbachev, like an idiot, dissolved the country rather than stepping down. So everybody lost their pensions right away and their patents of the country, and the country was dissolved. An event attended by Norway's then foreign minister, the following 5-year saw removal of non-problematic fuel elements, first by ship to Murmansk, and then by train to a reprocessing plant in Mayak and Choblink. Much of the work is paid for by Norway. Now, however, remains the most challenging work in the Riva Bay, the damaged elements where experts fear accidents could happen during lifting and repackaging into new containers. In 2000, there goes my accent. In 2023, the risky part of Andriva Bay nuclear cleanup starts. So a lot of the fuel was cemented into place, so they can't physically touch each other, but was supposed to be kept on water. For 35 years, highly radioactive fuel assemblies were stored in rusty, and you talk about the Ruskins, you always use the Rusky, right? Rusty, partially destroyed steel pipes where concrete of poor quality was filled into spaces between. Some of the assemblies are stuck in the canisters, while some of the canisters are stuck in the cells. So 22,000 spent fuel assemblies are stored in the tanks. Coming from 90 to 100 reactor cores powering the Soviet Navy's Cold War submarines sailing in the 1950s till 1982. 22,000 spent fuel assemblies. And Andriva Bay is located about 55 kilometers from Russia's border to Norway. So the Atlantic Ocean. So if you go over to Scumbag Wikipedia, the repository entered services in 1961. In 1982, a nuclear accident occurred in which radioactive water was released from a pool in building number 5 at Andriva Bay. The cleanup of the accident took place in 83 to 89, 6 years, and about 700,000 tons of highly concentrated radioactive water, so liquid fuel basically, leaked. Well, so 770,000 tons, you can't call that a leak. That's 1.5 billion pounds. That's not a leak, that's an event, right? It contained 2 pools for storing spent fuel assemblies encased in steel drums, which is how they done it back then. Each pool was designed for about 2,000 drums. The drums were suspended underwater by chains, which were attached to consoles a certain distance from each other to avoid a non-controlled nuclear chain reaction from starting. The water served as biological protection from gamma shines, X-rays, neutron bursts. The drums were often placed underwater using chains. This was supposed to be borated water, no doubt. But due to the construction's unreliability, drums often fell to the bottom of the pool. As a result, spent nuclear fuel drums dangerously piled up at the bottom, and there ain't no going in there. One of the workers recalled, the first time I came here I was shocked. I'd never seen such a nightmare. Did not even conceive it was possible. Just imagine an enormous black windowless building atop a cliff. An entry into the building number 5 was decorated by deformed trucks previously used for carrying nuclear fuel and half torn down heavy gates. And inside the building was dilapidated, electric equipment in dangerous conditions, the roof letting through sites of Aurora Borealis, and more terrifyingly, colossal beta particle contamination levels and traveling gamma waves reflected from plates and walls. Bring out the homeless. Building number 5 was completely radioactive inside. If a drop of water happened to fall on your head, you had to be decontaminated for a long time since the drop contained tens of thousands of beta particles. First off, why would you go in there with your head exposed? Well, how can you survive in there without getting some kind of disease or illness? The death of officer from a radiation overdose, and they actually link to that. So I opened the link, of course, that link is dead, which is supposed to be Wikipedia. And it was really hard to hunt it down on the internet. On top of that, the right-hand pool in Building 5 started leaking in February 1982. Finding cracks in the metal coating required diving into the pool, which was out of the question due to gamma shines in the vicinity of the nuclear waste drums reached 1,700 rims an hour. And I think a rim was equal to a sievert, 17,000 rather. A lethal dose. An attempt, it's an absurd number we're talking about, by the way. Because 5 to 10 is a lethal dose. An attempt to eliminate the leak was made by pouring in 20 sacks of flour. Really? Only a nuclear scientist probably told him to do that on the telephone, right? Thus filling the crack up with flour dough. Remember the story about Fukushima's destroyed reactor buildings were fixed right after the buildings at Fukushima looked like this? And we cover a story quite often for a bit of fun, where they say they fixed the leaks. Imagine these buildings are completely destroyed, 190-foot buildings, reactors. They fixed it with sawdust and newspaper and glue. What they call liquid glass, right? Did I miss it? Yeah, 20 sacks of flour. Sorry. At the end of September, the right-hand pool's leak reached dangerous levels of 30 tons per day. That's not a leak. 30 tons is not a leak. It's a huge volume. The risk of exposure to the top parts of the nuclear fuel assemblies, which will immediately lead to fire and then a detonation from the hydrogen produced by it, as well as contamination of the entire aquatic territories. All of the water from the right-hand pool drained into the bay. The left-hand pool sprouted a leak at 10 tons a day. And the hard, early climate covering the pool's surface with 20-centimeter layer of ice in the winter. In order to solve the problem, the ice was melted using steam from the boiler in blatant violation of radioactive radiation safety protocol. This was accomplished by drilling a hole in the ice cover. A pipe was inserted to the hole and steam was pumped through the pipe under the ice, melting it. Radioactive aerosol spread through the whole building, leaking into the air outside. And then again, using the word leaking doesn't do it justice or even close to it. From the memoirs of the cleanup efforts leader after the accident, everybody present was terrified, knowing there was numerous radioactive nuclear waste drums at the bottom, rating up to 17,000 rankins an hour, which shouldn't have been used in this article, of course, because that's an old measurement. That should have been converted already. Simple arithmetic told me that the next to one of those drums would receive a dose equal to 4.7 rims a second. In death's embrace on the radioactive water of Riva Bay. A moment later, another worker, heroically, the man had fell into the pool. Another man jumped into the pool to save his comrade's life. A few seconds later, they both surfaced completely soaked in radioactive water. Witnesses say their faces had the expression of utter terror. The first worker himself remembered, at the moment I thought it was hell when I found myself submerged in radioactive water and his leg was caught by a death ray emitting drum. Death's hot embrace enveloped my body and began to pull my conscience into a warm daze. In the moment I thought I was only 20 years old and I did not want to die. Just then my friend and savior, risking his own life, freed my leg from under the nuclear waste drums and we emerged to the pool's surface. Boat workers were sent into the showers, and the dosimeter arrow kept passing tens of millions of beta decays. Boat workers had their hair removed from all parts of their body. slept separately from everybody else, received food and rubber gloves, since their bodies themselves were now sources of gamma radiation. Really? What about beta and alphas and neutrons? The dose to which they were exposed is unknown, as the dosimeters, which back in them days were garbage, by the way, sank in the pool. We only managed to wash our bodies from radioactive chemical by the end of the month. And we had to remove the skin on the heels and parts of our hands with razors until they bled, since these areas resisted decontamination. An uncontrolled chain reaction during the cleanup. When nuclear fuel drums were loaded from the building number 5 into dry storage containers, it often happened that cells deformed from physical impact and ice spilt the nuclear fuel. The working sailors then used regular shovels to pour the nuclear fuel into the cement-encased vertical steel pipes. These actions led to accumulation of critical mass and uncontrolled chain reactions with an S, glowing from radiation and emitting a buzzing sound which quickly subsided. Phenomenon was observed by nearby sailors. Of course, we did not file official reports. The Navy usually concealed such information to avoid taking the blame. Blue-green flashes light as neutron burst were observed in the left-hand pool in Building 5 during the work on lifting nuclear waste drums from the bottom. There were uncontrolled chain reactions were confirmed by physicists. How many other sites worldwide is this actually going on too, I wonder? Yeah, thanks, James. Steve White make it tonight? Or Stephen Young make it tonight? Oh, let me see. Just keep her rolling here. We got a poll. We got a poll going. Should smoke detectors using evil, man-made nuclear americium-241 be banned and recalled? And unequivocally, they should be banned and recalled. It's outrageous. It's unbelievable that they do that. It's inconceivable that the nuclear industry got away with this. We have 54 votes, but only 43 likes, because they're censoring the daylight sodomy. Bizarrely, we have 9% still saying that, no, we should return smoke detectors to the... We shouldn't stop doing it, because the industry can't survive without being evil. That's how it makes its living. Smoke detectors is just one way. Nuclear waste opponents encouraged by candidates' response. Now, this is a Canadian story. Currently, the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, which doesn't manage, has never managed any nuclear waste, has shortlisted 2 sites after 18 years, including a location between Inglis and Dresden, northwestern Ontario, as potential burial sites for all of Canada's high-level nuclear waste, high-level fuel rods that are still splitting the atom into the environment and the communities where they're stored. It's so evil it defies logic that these people exist. The Non-Waste Management Organization identified the township of Inglis, which is surrounded by farms and water, huge, unbelievable amount of ponds around these places, as potential host communities. And they're just burning money in these communities, giving away millions and millions of dollars to every organization there for free. But they're not spending a nickel on the repository, despite it being more than 40 kilometers from the site and in a different watershed. Lodge says the New Democratic Party was the only one of the 3 responding parties who candidates all answered yes to each of the 4 questions, indicating that they support the inclusion of downstream and transportation communities in making decisions about whether a site. So if you're downriver or downstream of these communities, you have an input on this dump. But a decision about whether a site in Northern Ontario should be considered further as a nuclear waste burial site. So the idea is to keep it divided, never have a site, and keep it hemorrhaging into the environment. And they do that by trying to put it into communities, right? And then feeding millions of dollars to the opposition, the pro-nuclear community. So they'll fight back. Of course, they get more money, free money, with no oversight, no auditing on top of that. Rather than picking a place far, far away from contention so that it never happens, is on purpose. Increase the safety inspection of vehicles carrying radioactive waste, call for audit of the non-waste management organization spending, which is what they should do. They should 100% have an audit to see where the money is going, because it's not going to an actual repository. They're buying off communities, parts of communities, to cause a divide. And we see this worldwide, the exact same tactics everywhere worldwide where these issues are being explored. Investments in conservations and renewable energy sources ahead of more nuclear investment. So the three of the candidates said, well, shouldn't we have renewables rather than nuclear? One candidate was unclear about their support of the call for an audit. Why wouldn't you want to audit your taxpayers' money? And they're throwing it away because the reason that candidate didn't, because his constituency would have got a lot of money, right? And because he would have been pro-nuclear, see? Several indicated that they were undecided about whether they supported the lunatic Ontario investing in conservation renewable energy ahead of experimental new nuclear reactors. So rather than taking the money and coming up with solutions for energy storage and proper renewables, they will do everything but. No, but we'll spend 10 times the money trying to develop mixed oxide fuel small modular reactors that are illegal in Canada, by the way. Because that's what small modular reactors are. They're going to be mixed oxide fuel. Reclaimed uranium, plutonium, like that are billions and billions and billions of times more toxic than industrial poison, the emissions. Once you take them out of the reactor, they're going to hemorrhage into the environment for millions of years. You can't put that stuff in a hole in the ground for decades and decades. The Green Party candidates all answered yes to each of the four questions. However, the candidate running in Sudbury, Robinson, broke with party policy, saying they did not support investment in energy conservations. Why not? And renewables. Why not? Ahead of the investment in experimental new nuclear technology that doesn't exist. The physicists announced final results from the Daya Bay neutrino experiment final data set. We've covered this several times over the years. Now, they say the neutrinos can go through a mile of lead. So if you had a mile thick lead, they say the neutrino can go right through that with no effect to the neutrino, which is because you're talking about, how do you explain it to the average person that's not familiar with the subject? Well, let's see if we can do it this way. Over nearly 9 years, the Daya Bay reactor neutrino experiment captured and spent a fortune rather than coming up with solutions. An unprecedented 5.5 million interactions from subatomic particles called neutrinos, which is quarks and quacks and everything else. The international team of physicists has reported the first results from the experiment's full database. Rather than going down solving Fukushima, they're going to, and of course this is Brookhaven's National Laboratory, which is on one of America's biggest aquifers. It's incredibly radioactive, and expect another 50 years they'll be able to clean it up. How are you going to clean up water and radiation that's already left the aquifer? How does that actually work, I wonder? A key partner for understanding how neutrinos change their flavors. Some of the biggest mysteries surrounding the nature of matter and the universe. They don't got it right to look at this stuff till they come up with solutions for the misery they've already created on our planet. Why are we wasting, why are we giving them this knowledge when they're only going to weaponize it and destroy the future of all species with it? Neutrinos are subatomic particles. They're both famously elusive, tremendously abundant, and they endlessly bombard every inch of surface of the Earth at speeds of light, but rarely interact with matter, and they can travel through get a load of this, a light year worth of lead without disturbing a single atom. Not a mile of lead, I got that wrong. A light year of lead. If you're traveling at the speed of light for a whole year, then that thickness of lead, the neutrinos can actually come right straight through that. The very definition of a ghost, isn't it? Well, thankfully, most of these people are incapable of actually figuring out this, because if they do, they're going to weaponize it. They can travel through a light year's worth of lead without even disturbing an atom that's in the lead. This is absurdness, by the way. They can't quantify that assertion, by the way. One of the defining characteristics of these ghost-like particles is their ability to oscillate between three distinct flavors. So you have the muon, the tau, and electron neutrinos. Brookhaven National Laboratories. I have zero respect for what they've done to their neighbors, poisoned all the children and communities, so they can make their dollar. Rather than come up with solutions so they didn't poison the community, they said, oh, well, it's cheaper. We don't care about ourselves or our families or our neighbors. The Beijing-based Institute of High Energy Physicists of the Chinese Academy of Sciences leads China's role in the collaboration, which is bizarre that they're working with American Department of Energy and Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, aka Genocide Machine, and the Brookhaven National Laboratory, who poisoned millions of people around their facility. First of its kind partnership for a major physicist project between China and the United States. 2 caverns are near the nuclear reactors. The third cavern is further away, providing ample distance for the antineutrinos to oscillate. By comparing the number of electron antineutrinos picked up by the near and far detectors, physicists calculated how many changed, flavored, and consequently the value of theta 13, appropriately named, I would say. The next generation neutrino experiments, like the deep underground neutrino experiment done, will average the Daya Bay results, precise measurements, and compare properties of neutrinos, antineutrinos currently under construction, will provide physicists with the world's most intense neutrino beam. Underground detectors separated by 800 miles, not a light year of lead, and the opportunity to study the behavior of neutrinos like never before. They've studied anything to do with nuclear, they've studied that more than the natural elements by orders of magnitude. So if you look at Brookhaven, how the government is removing the Brookhaven plume shows a possible future for Nasu. The Brookhaven plume has left that spot a long time ago. The Federal Department of Energy is more than 20 years into a $360 million plan to extract the entirety of the pollution that leaked from Brookhaven. They've been at it 20 years. They expect to be eliminated in another 40 to 50 years. And they're probably not even doing it. They're just taking the money. Because that's what they're like in the first place, see? The Daya Bay collaboration has 237 participants of 42 institutions in Asia, Europe, North America. And the physicists measured the theta 13 in terms of oscillation amplitude, or what is mathematically written material provided by the Brookhaven National Laboratory. Their legacy is horrific. It's horrific. It's embarrassing. NATO chief responds to Russia's nuclear blackmail. And NATO, if you look up NATO's 30 militaries. So we're getting spammed tonight, are we? In the poll. Now we have 11% says that smoke detectors using evil man-made nuclear americium-241 should not be banned and recalled. And 89%, of 57 votes, by the way, says, the majority obviously says it does, but they're just spamming you. That's somebody with a bunch of accounts who's spamming us. That's not a whole bunch of people coming and saying, no, I don't agree, Dana. Because who brings up that topic besides me? NATO, of course, is 30 militaries. They're the lapdog of UN, by the way. They don't do nothing without UN's permission. NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg says the Ruskies has long agreed the use of nuclear weapons is a situation which everyone loses. So stop making them. Stop. You don't need them. You're not going to use them. You can make the bomb, but you don't need to put nuclear inside of it. Just put a bunch of stuffed teddy bears inside of it. Use of nuclear weapons by Russia completely changes the course of war. Russia keeps saying they're going to use nuclear weapon, but that's because NATO is feeding Ukraine with all kinds of surface-to-air missiles, single-shot, carry-on-your-shoulder types. So, and you got 40 countries supplying Stinger missiles and Javelin missiles. Canada has done it completely or relentlessly. The use of nuclear weapons by Russia completely changes the course of the war. You noted that NATO monitors the behavior of Russia, including nuclear exercises and rhetoric used by the World Economic Forum's young global leaders, Vladimir Putin. According to Stoltenberg, nuclear blackmail is dangerous. Nuclear blackmail is dangerous and increases tension, but the Russian Federation not yet changed its position. We remind the Russians they have to agree that a nuclear war will not be a win-win situation, so it cannot be started. That the use of weapons by Russia will completely change the conflict. Bigger than Maralinga, Australia's forgotten atomic test sites. This was a book, The Secrets of Emmon Field. Elizabeth Tynan, I think you pronounce it. New South, $34.99, $35. She was researching. It's a pretty interesting story. I have to go to the big screen to tell it, I guess. While on research, I visited Polygon, an area remote northeast Kazakhstan, where the former Soviet Union conducted hundreds of nuclear tests. It was late summer, and the battered earth was carpeted in wildflowers, radioactive wildflowers. The situation in our rump-sprung four-wheel drive become tense. Our guide, a former Soviet nuclear physicist, balked at the question asked whether Polygon had evacuated the tribespeople before testing had begun. Incensed, he turned to me and said, "You're from Australia, no? Why don't you research the British and Aboriginals in southern Australia?" Well, she should have said, well, because I'm here researching this also. But she did. So I did and stumbled onto my own ignorance that although no defense is shared by too many Australians, it gives the reception it deserves. Elizabeth's new book, The Secret of Emmon Field, will help plug the gap. Totem 1, Totem 2 were nuclear British tests. The British went there, Maralinga and Montebello and Emmonsfield and a few other places. They waited for the wind to blow across Australia, and then they set off the nuclear weapons. And then they got out of there as quick as they could. They all but vanished from our popular memories, drowned out by the larger test performed 200 kilometres up the road of Maralinga. Yet they remain an important chapter in Australia's Cold War. Faithful to the genre, still has detail redacted from the public records. We covered this a lot. In it, the colonial attitudes of the British are resilient, following scant detail from the British. Australian Prime Minister Robert Menzies was quick to sign over Central Australia as a site for foreign intimates to conduct nuclear testing. And from there, Australia and our government were excluded from decision-making or even knowledge of the fundamental facts. And when the time came to detonate, both countdowns boomed over the salt brush in the English accent. The test's purpose is to see if the British can produce effective nuclear weapons on the cheap by going to another country and contaminating it. So that's a nuclear war, see? That's the definition of a nuclear war, when you contaminate another country. By including a larger amount of less stable plutonium. There was over 700 tests where they took plutonium, wrapped it in conventional explosive, aka dirty bombs, and detonated it. The Totem 1 was expected to be more powerful, but turned out to be weaker, betrays how uncontrolled the tests really were. And the British, while strict on security, were lax about safety of the Australians and even their own servicemen, and led to many of them struck ill in later life, still too terrible to speak out lest they be imprisoned, because it's illegal for him. They were sworn secrecy, despite the fact of the time that's already gone by. Well, they're sworn to secrecy so the truth wouldn't come out. The evilness of it wouldn't come out. And it's absurd. So it's a stupid, literally stupid industry. After the test, the black mist coated trees in sticky residue and made many of the natives sick for generations. And Thailand does their very best to reconstruct the stories of the people poisoned by contaminated land. Most were, and radioactive followed, most were unearthed by a royal commission 30 years later. And still, critical details remain unrecoverable. We have no baseline of the health data. Australia has the highest cancer rates per 100,000 worldwide, by the way. We have no baseline of health data to compare to subsequent fallout. And more than the scant 1950s information gathering infrastructure in remote locations, this negative space is a crime of omission. As known full well by the guides in Kazakhstan, neither the British nor the Australian government took responsibilities for ensuring the land was clear of people. And when the British left, it was in such a hurry, the dishes were still in the mess tents. Not to mention the red dirt melted to radioactive black glass called trinonite. Both were left for Australians to eventually clean up. And this story is known better to a Russian scientist in Kazakhstan than to most locals of the test host country. Is a poor reflection of what we consider important. And so the secret of Emmon Field is a vital addition to the national record indeed. And we appreciate people like that that's trying to do the best they can. Letter, sickening hypocrisy and greed. So when I was a child in school, we had nuclear bomb drills. We learned to duck and cover in a futile effort to survive any possible nuclear attack. Is that the same? That's a different. I lost the headline of this story by the looks of it. This was again about the non-waste management organization here in Canada. The objections of groups like the concerned citizens of Renfrew County, Quebec cottagers, the Ottawa raging grannies, various indigenous communities, and others opposed to the nearest surface disposal facility. And they call it a low-level nuclear waste repository, but it's not. It appears to have based their arguments on two premises. The repository will leak at some stage of its life, and the leak radioactive elements will reach the Ottawa River. Second, they argue that any level of radiation is harmful. Oh yeah, and so this is about Chalk River, putting a repository at the nuclear wasteland in Chalk River, which provides drinking water downstream for just millions and millions and millions of people. What experimental evidence is there to support either of these premises? There are surface and near-surface deposits of thorium and uranium within the watershed in Quebec side of the Ottawa River. These geological deposits are open to elements with no engineered containment. In spite of this, there is insignificant burden of uranium and thorium in the Ottawa River at the present time. There is insignificant burden. Well, a river is moving, so it'll concentrate downriver in back eddies and stuff like that also. And the fish and the animals. You can't quantify that assertion by saying that. It says, and look what he says. We are continuously bombarded with cosmic rays from the sun and outer space. Well, what kind of stupid, idiotic, moron argument is that? You can't conflate that with man-made anthropogenic radiation. And you know that. Saying that is simply to confuse the ones who don't know any better. And it's despicable that somebody would actually do it, let alone print it. It's despicable. And the people that are doing that should be held accountable, and outer space. So talking about something that is the fabric of life that everybody's acclimated to through genetic superior selection, and equating that with man-made anthropogenic radiation that attacks everything with splitting cells, is simply, that's the definition of evil. And that's what we expect from this coward industry. The intensities of cosmic rays increases with elevation, and every passenger in an aeroplane. Like, this has nothing to do with man-made radiation. You breathe it in, it gets in your body, it pulses energy every second for the rest of your life. If you get in a plane, you go up, you're getting extra stronger rays than you would at the ground level, but you're coming back down to the ground an hour later, and that stops immediately. It's the equivalent of comparing fuel rods to a campfire. It's evil. Receives a dose of radiation. No, you don't receive a dose of radiation. Again, you can't equate natural with man-made. You can only do that if you're in a sinister. Airline pilots and flight attendants receive radiation doses comparable with atomic workers. No, they don't. They're not ingesting uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium, strontium, and 1,000 other fission products. It's not in their body. The body's not being attacked every second for the rest of their life by white blood cells, which displaces the red blood cells, which carry oxygen and nutrition throughout their body permanently. It's a completely different effect. Many people receive more radiation from medical and dental x-rays and from diagnosis and radiation therapy isotopes. These are very harmful man-made emitters. Again, it's completely different. And they don't understand the harm, or they wouldn't have these exposures in the first place, and do not seem to produce any harmful side effects. Well, how would you know that? There's 1,800 illnesses and diseases, autoimmune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses. It's not just cancer. The radiation dose is much larger than would be obtained from drinking water if the entire waste repository was dumped into the Ottawa River without any engineering protection. Well, this is absurdness. If you're drinking as you're bioaccumulating, it sequesters your muscles, your organs, and your bones. It's pulsing energy inside your body forever. Your body's going to attack it for the rest of your life. You can't equate that with natural stuff. And you can't say dumping it, all of it, into the river would be harmless. Just incredible lowlifes. Despicable lowlife. Despicable people for printing this on top of that. There are people who are involved in the cleanup after the accidents in Chalk River who received significant doses of radiation above the normal background and yet continue to live normal lives. And you can't quantify that assertion by just saying something like that. Saying it is not evidence. Where's the evidence? There is no evidence. It's impossible to come up with evidence. In fact, they bring up ex-American President Jimmy Carter, which leads you to believe Ron Adams wrote it. Ex-American President Jimmy Carter will be 98 this year, and reviewing his biography has had no more medical problems could be expected from someone his age. He has, in fact, no, he didn't. He had huge medical issues, and because he was the president of the country, he got access to stuff that nobody else was able to get access to. He lived much longer than any other American president. Radiation he received as an officer during the cleanup operations at NRX Reactor, which was Chalk River, that they hid away for decades on top of that, do not seem to have any deleterious effects. You're such a lowlife. W. Turner, Deep River, you're such an incredible lowlife. Why don't you put your whole name there, you piece of dirt? You incredible coward. Concentrated radiation can be life-saving. No, it can't. It destroys all your other organs. And while the majority of the radiation is concentrated in the specific part of the body, it will inevitably be a small amount of radiation to the rest of the body, or to the bodies of the spouses, the children, and friends who come in contact with the patients. So concentrated radiation will radiate everybody else, but affix the person that was originally dosed. You're a lunatic. These low doses to family members have not been shown to have deleterious effects to the human wives or children of the patients. And again, you don't point to any studies to quantify that. You're the lowest of lowest of lowest. You're another one of those like if you look at this person's legacy, you'll find out that they poisoned millions and millions of people. These low doses may even be beneficial. So you're claiming that you get a hormesis effect from man-made dirty bombs, will you? Can you possibly be any more revolting than this person, I wonder? So the person received a large dose of radioactive iodine. Unfortunately, it didn't kill him. Without it, I would have been dead before the age of 40, which is just a crime on its own. One consequence is this was my body was emitting far more than the usual amount of radiation from natural burden of carbon. You can't say carbon and potassium. You're a horrific scumbag. You are a horrific scumbag, buddy. It's people like you should be on death row. I'm almost ashamed to be a human here right now, that people like that even exist on this planet. It's humiliating, really, that people... It's humiliating that people like that even exist. So, 1 becquerel is atomic disintegration per second, an atom pulse in energy. A Curie has 37 billion becquerels. 37 billion atomic disintegrations per second. Potassium-40 is 0.000071 curies per gram. 71 10 millionth curies per gram versus 88 curies per gram for man-made cesium and 140 for strontium-90 per gram. So comparing potassium to man-made is like comparing a stick of dynamite to an atomic bomb. The comparison is incredibly ludicrous. See, your body can only hold so much potassium. Your body regulates it. It's called homeostasis. Your body regulates it like a thermostat regulates the temperature of your room, or cruise control regulates the speed of the automobile. He said, it means at home I was irradiating my wife and children. 50 years later, the children appear to be normally healthy. I doubt that. If you had children, there's zero possibility they're going to be normal. And my wife and I are only experiencing normal age-related problems. Certainly, this amount of radiation brought to the patient and my family members come in contact with them is very much greater than that conceivable doses from drinking, bathing, or swimming in water downstream of Chalk River's proposed nuclear dump. You despicable sack of nothing. The Canadian National Laboratory, Chalk River, identified its facilities near surface. Not near surface, it's actually 18 meters above the ground. It's above the surface. Even worse. To quote a well-known phrase, let the buyer beware, which was a retort, right? That part right there was a retort in the same article. Let the buyer beware was another person, right? It was W. Turner in Deep River. Whereas the first guy I don't know anymore. Japan to partly reopen the Fukushima village to residents in June. The Japanese government, the nuclear industry, intends to partially lift restrictions in Futaba and Kuma, which are both within a couple of miles of ongoing multiple nuclear meltdowns. They're on each side of the nuclear meltdowns. The industry is insane. 3 other municipalities will see the easing of restrictions in 2000. They put 33, it's supposed to be 2023. The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power facility experienced core meltdowns. Nuclear reactor meltdowns is what it should say. The accident became the worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl, which really, who knows, because they keep saying that, so it's most likely something else has already happened, leading to massive radiation exposure and contamination of surrounding waters. No, it covered the whole planet in radiation quite quickly. The Japanese, there's no such thing as authorities in Japan no more. The Japanese murder squad, nuclear murder squad, has decided to partially reopen the village of Katsurao, which was blocked off due to high radiation levels, and allow victims back into a nuclear wasteland. Nice move, stupid. The decision comes after plants, nuclear puppets in Tokyo, concluded in May the decontamination of the nuclear wastelands bore fruit, radioactive fruit, and radiation levels no longer pose a threat, despite the fact that the reactors are still melting down. To citizens, that's a derogatory term, by the way. To date, only 8 of 82 village residences announces their wish to return. And that's only because they're getting paid or they're part of the industry. Or they're literally stupid. Government okays reopening Fukushima nuclear wasteland to residences after a decade. Some registered residents of a part of the Fukushima village made off limits by high radiation levels. So a 0.95 square kilometer part, a Katsurao located near the defunct, near the multiple nuclear meltdowns. So the omission tells you how deceptive they actually are. will have its difficult return zone classification lifted. The government difficult to return zone, just a tiny fraction, but everything else, you can't cross the street. Everything else is still difficult to return. And the Reconstruction Agency, which was created to do the betrayal for a paycheck. The move comes after national local governments decided and made that the area's radiation decontamination infrastructural developments had progressed enough to reopen. The entirety of the Katsurao became off limits after the nuclear crisis. Radioactive fallout is forever. Nuclear wastelands are forever. And so, as a sign of good faith, nuclear students and academics should move their children there and prove how safe it is for a couple of decades. Currently around 337 square kilometers of land in 6 municipalities, including Katsurao, Okuma, and Futaba, are still subject to difficult to return zone classifications. Among the 5 other Fukushima municipalities inside the zone, Futaba or Okuma are set to have restrictions partially lifted. Don't cross the street, kids. Anybody who takes the children back then should be arrested for child abuse. The nuclear industry should be arrested for genocide and omnicide. However, more than 90% of difficult return zones in the prefectures will remain under the classifications. So they're going to open 10% of a nuclear wasteland, in the middle of the nuclear wasteland, because they're academics and that's what mass weirdos do, right? You really got to be some kind of scumbag to do what they just done there. Like, there should be a new classification for whoever is willing to do something like that. Japan, where stupid is normal, is common. The nearly 1 square kilometer area, near the word defunct, was a no-go zone. An atomic leak. Atomic leak that covered the entire planet in 19 days now is considered atomic leak. That's the Pacific, that's the Atlantic, that's the planet after 19 days. The Prime Minister Puppet said cancelling evacuation orders in the remaining difficult turn areas was important for the large-scale reconstruction of a nuclear wasteland. Some 340 square kilometers of land, 6 municipalities are difficult to return zones. Kyoto reported more than 90% of difficult return zones in the prefecture would remain closed since there is no timetable to make it completely accessible again. So opening 10% of a nuclear wasteland means you're going to get sick. For sure, right? 50-year-old nuke plant bites to dust. That's a great story. And black rain was what happened. Maralinga, certainly, we just covered. But also Hiroshima, Nagasaki. It was deadly black rain. Pulled the plug 10 days early to control rot seal problems. In other words, nobody wanted to spend another penny on a decrepit old shit nuke plant located on Lake Michigan, drinking water for millions or tens of millions of people. So the plant started up in 1971, meaning it released its reactors radiation into the lake and air of surrounding communities for 50 years. See, we got a viewer read that article by the looks of it. Meaning it released its reactors radiation into the communities, the lake, and the air of surrounding communities for 50 years. I don't think we've ever seen that statement in media before. So awesome, eh? That's just hilarious. It caught me off guard, really, because you don't really see the truth very often. Nuclear reactors were designed to operate for only 40 years. Actually, it was 30 years was the original charters. Oak Ridge National Laboratory partner launched first experiments using new facility to make cosmic isotopes on Earth. But they're not going to go fix Fukushima. They're just going to take all the talent they could find and waste it on something that means nothing. 2 decades in the making. Not solutions for Fukushima or other nuclear accidents, but something to take the smart people, use them somewhere else. Don't use them on anything that's beneficial. Useful idiots from the Department of Energy's Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which is a nuclear wasteland, and a large one at that, have a hand in 10 of its first 34 experiments. The Department of Energy Office of Science User Facility at Michigan State University School of Mass Destruction will produce more than 1,000 new rare isotopes. That we should all hang our head in humiliation right now because of that. And americium-241 is one of them. These are not your parents' isotopes such as americium-241 in smoke detectors, rather. So let's look up the smoke detectors, which, by the way, we have a poll tonight. We got 60 votes, 88%. So we're being spammed by 12%. Should smoke detectors using evil man-made nuclear americium-241 be banned and recalled? Yeah, of course it should be. And the majority of the votes acknowledge that. Well, let's learn a little bit about your smoke detector, the americium in your smoke detectors. Emits alpha rays. And a mixture of americium-241 and beryllium is capable of emitting neutrons. It is efficiently used as a source for neutrons. Wow. Americium-241 in smoke detectors. I guess we got to go to this screen, do we? Why not? The main function of this device is to detect the presence of smoke caused by fire. The ionizing alpha radiation for americium-241 is utilized to create ions that produce a low and steady electric pulse current. When the smoke particles enter the chamber, they create a disturbance. So the americium is exposed to the environment for that to happen and trigger the alarm in the detector. So radioactive materials are kept to a minimum in the device so it cannot have any damaging effect on radiation on the human body, they claim. But there's no containment around it, obviously. So 241 americium causes different serious health problems. And using the device, the following points should therefore be kept in mind. Never try and dismantle the smoke detector. Never try and remove the source of 241 americium. Never attempt to burn the device in order to dispose of it. Any of these actions will expose you to radioactivity. Even though it's not illegal to throw nuclear waste 241 americium in the trash, it's best to return it to the manufacturer to dispose of it safely. And how many people do you think know that? It is very unlikely for people to come in direct contact, except when you're installing it, or you buy it and sitting alongside you on the way home. It can have adverse effects or in your room. It's going to be shedding radiation on human health in cases of inhalation and ingestion. Dirty buggers, man. It was spread into the environment in large amounts during nuclear weapons testing in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s. And also Chernobyl in 1981. What about Fukushima, scumbags? It tends to accumulate in the livers and the skeleton and causes serious liver and bone problems and diseases. The half-life is 432 years, so 4,300 years. As a result, but it'll decay into other isotopes that might last for tens of thousands of years. It may remain and undergo decays within the body, because when it decays, say half of it decays after 432 years, it decays into something else. It doesn't go away, ever. Even when it's just 10 decays later, so-called radioactive lead, it's still man-made lead. It's still emitting, see? May even be responsible for causing cancers, nearby organs and tissues. It tends to accumulate in the liver and skeleton. It can pose acute health risk. Special protective equipment like gloves, safety goggles, footwear covers should be used while dealing with americium-241. People using this substance should also ideally wear proper respiratory equipment, Scotty backpacks with a Pegasus full face, to avoid ill effects due to inhalation of this lethal enemy of humanity. These are not your parents' isotopes, such as americium-241 and smoke detectors. So back to that story. So Oak Ridge National Laboratory, these are the accelerators, propelling heavy ions to half the speed of light into a target to make more than 1,000 new isotopes, once only found in space. Dozens of Y-12 workers exposed in 1958 nuclear accident at Oak Ridge. So they had an uncontrolled chain reaction. Now Oak Ridge has it's a big site full of nuclear test reactors that melted down, nuclear dump sites, nuclear burn pits. Their entire legacy is just frightening. And then they only acknowledge cancer. Look at that. I can get out of the way there, can I? Hang on. It's supposed to look like this. There we go, back to normal. As to whether radiation doses were sufficient to cause cancer, that can depend on what type of cancer. There's 1,800 illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries. It's not just cancer. In order to collect compensation, it must be determined it was least likely as not that the worker's career radiation dose was enough to cause cancer. But just ingesting a single atom sequesters in your muscles, your organs, and your bones. Your body attacks it for the rest of your life with white blood cells. It could take decades to build a tumor around it. But if you get enough of it in you, you compromise your immune system. Now you're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless and benign and innocuous, right? If they develop one of 22 types of cancer, they can immediately eligible to collect $150,000. So what they done was they only acknowledged cancer, not the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other diseases, like heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome. It's disgusting. And then, we've seen so much of this over the years. It still doesn't stop shocking me that they're so evil. Conservation Law Foundation, Pilgrim radioactive water should be sent to specialized storage. It should be. I'm not laughing. It's the gallows laugh, because for 4 to 5 decades they dumped it in the bay, because that's the Cape Cod Bay, I believe. And all plants have done that, see? But now, because Holtec has said they're going to dump water there and this plant is closed, now the issue came up, right? And there was some blowback from government about it. And a lot of that's like, because what they're talking about is to spend fuel water. They took the fuel out of the pool, the only thing left is the pool. Now the pool doesn't evaporate because the fuel is out of it. So normally the fuel rods or reactor cores are in these pools. They boil off about 120,000 liters a day, and that goes up to tall skinny stacks. And that falls, typically these places are surrounded by farms. I don't think Pilgrim was surrounded by farms though. But typical of nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms because the fuel pools are still splitting the atoms. Those atoms, a large majority will fall right away. And the farms will suck that up, and then they'll harvest the farms and move it out of that area. And that keeps the number. Yeah, this place is not surrounded by farms. That's right. A New England Conservation Group is the owner of Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station. It's called Holtec, which is Chris Singh. To commit not to release radioactive water at Cape Cod Bay. Like we covered Holtec for about 1 hour in the last show, right? On Thursday. Nuclear Non-Regulatory Commissions have said Holtec's past releases met federal standards. First off, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission doesn't go through or review what Holtec is saying or going to do. They have met federal standards, and as long as the future releases meets those standards, the company would not need any further permission from the Non-Regulatory Commission to move forward. So as long as they claim that it's the same becquerels per liter, the NRC has washed its hands of it. Well, the NRC is not acknowledged that it doesn't review this stuff. They're not regulatory agencies, right? They're opposition, controlled opposition is what they are. Government wants federal bailout rule changed to keep Diablo Canyon power plant alive. Government, I think by that statement, our government wants federal bailout rules changed. Again, we got to go to this screen. Plant opposing San Luis Obispo Mothers for Peace said the governor's attempt to bail out a private company is misguided and they're responsible, which is 100% quite right. Mothers for Peace claims the plant is old. Yeah, well, that it is old. That it's unsafe, and everybody knows it's unsafe. That's true. It's redundant and uneconomical, which is already, because if it's redundant and uneconomical, then they wouldn't have to change the rules now, would they? It's uneconomical because that's why they got to change all the rules. Requiring tax-paid subsidies to keep it operating, which is what they're trying to do. Nuclear-powered ship to make 2 coastwide voyages. This is Russia. Of course, Russia's legacy of submarines and everything else is just frightening. Let me see if I can. Because some of these screenshots are large, right? Planetary catastrophe averted by Russian crew. Planetary catastrophe. Planetary catastrophe. The whole planet is in jeopardy from a burning nuclear submarine, from radioactive fallout. So why are we building these pieces of shit on our planet for? Russia has several thousand nuclear objects dumped on its Arctic seafloor. List of objects are reactors from submarines, as well as spent nuclear fuel from reactors that serve the icebreaker Lenin. They just threw the reactor overboard because they're stupid as nuclear industry is either evil, stupid, or frighteningly a combination of both. In addition, 2 entire submarines will be lifted from the Barents Sea. And according to studies, about 95% of the 18,000 dumped objects, 18,000 dumped nuclear objects, have by nature's way come into safe conditions. No, the radiation doesn't decay for millions of years. And there's words I like to call you, but I'm not going to do it because I'm trying to finish up. Once I start, There goes the rest of the show, right? The Cold War submarine graveyard of Russia's Kola Peninsula. They got over 160, that's the missile tubes, the nuclear weapons missile tubes of that submarine. But there's 160 subs dumped in this area. Adjoining an off-limit naval base lies a secret that was only recently uncovered. This nuclear submarine scuttled and abandoned everywhere up there. They can't even decommission it. A cemetery where many a Russian submarine has gone to die. They just run it up on the beach and run away, eh? Private companies taking over the task of disassembling them and recycling the material. Yeah, that's right. This is madness. This is what no checks and balances get you. It's the definition of madness. Of all abandoned ships, nuclear ships and submarines. Left to their fate. 80% of the ship's steel is reusable in construction, but it's not. It's radioactive. That's why he ran away. That's why he dumped it like he did. That's why he scuttled it and ran away like he did. Tennessee Valley Authority whistleblowers sue agency in federal court. These are always heartwarming stories, aren't they? 3 former Tennessee Valley Authority nuclear oversight managers were removed from their post after alerting the U.S. Non-Regulatory Commission to repeated safety concerns and violations, are now suing the utility in federal court. There's the crazies. This is a mock-up, apparently. Nuclear power could be the future of expedition cruises. It's not the first time I come across these types of story. A new ship design concept from the Norwegian shipbuilders, Øystein, could be the first step towards a zero-emission future. Well, like when they say nuclear and zero emissions, that means they're part of that death cult. That's all that really means, 100%. That there's no way you can trust this organization, and that their intentions is to pollute the entire planet. That's what we've learned from people that utilizes the framing of that narrative like that. Such a ship would never need to refuel and could create its own supply of electricity, which in turn would be used to power a companion vessel. Named after a golden-haired Norse goddess who was also Thor's wife. These are lunatics, right? This expedition cruise ship with a passenger capacity of 60 would be able to explore environmentally fragile areas with minimal impact. Oh, except for all the radiation they release all the time. These are concepts right now. And they might not be built in this way, but they start off an important propaganda machine. By 2026, the West Norwegian fjords, 2 long coastal inlets in southwestern Norway, which are part of United Nations UNESCO World Heritage. Like, UNESCO shouldn't exist. UN shouldn't exist. They're a complete betrayal of the doctrines of every country worldwide. It's 195 militaries that are taking over your freedoms and liberties in your countries in increments over 70 years. Will be closed off to cruise ships and ferries, allowing only zero-emission vessels, which are supposed to be kayaks and canoes, not disgusting, despicable, brutal nuclear. There we go again. Test of a new wireless alert system at nuclear power stations coming up. They're talking about your cell phones. Like, the idea of the sirens is that everybody can hear it. So you put up 100 sirens, and there you know, if you can hear the siren, then you're supposed to sell your house and move away, far, far away, because you're in a huge emission zone. The Virginian Department of Emergency Management says it will be testing its new wireless emergency alert system next week. According to the release, the testing will support ongoing preparations for transitions from existing emergency siren systems to wireless at Virginia's nuclear power station. If there was an actual emergency, the residents who have alerts enabled, most people turn that annoying thing off because it's used for nonsense, will automatically get alerts on compatible phones. Well, that's why you had sirens, so you didn't have, right, to opt in by turning on your emergency alert or even having a cell phone handy. Women's College World Series kicks off with a visit from the Team America. And then this year they're going to be playing in Fukushima, which means your coaches are idiots and your parents for letting you do that. This was a weird one, eh? Damage estimated for a predicted quake on land in central Tokyo, with 190,000 buildings destroyed and 6,100 deaths. And evacuees could reach 3 million people. But 100% are directly under the southern part of Tokyo metropolitan area. There's a probability of about 70% that an earthquakes with a high percent are directly under the southern part of Tokyo or the eastern part of Tama would occur within the next 30 years. There's 36 million people in Tokyo, right? Village remains empty 11 years after Fukushima nuclear disaster. The center of the township is only 5 kilometers from the nuclear power plant. Well, it's not a power plant anymore. Now it's a multiple nuclear meltdown site. Now it's a planet killer, not a power plant. All villagers escaped from the plant after being severely irradiated. The radiation doses at the Fukushima Miami Elementary School, which is 3 kilometers, they claim measures 0.171 unisieverts per hour, which is below the standard levels. A 3.8 lousy unisieverts, which is not counting Becquerel's atomic decays, but is counting gamma shines, X-rays, and neutrons. Well, actually just gamma. For lifting the evacuation orders. Well, the claim, my goodness, the claim is 0.171 unisieverts, where you picked up millions of one-ton bags in just 3% of the land. Which media was that? Scumbag, degenerate, coward, the Don A. Lebo. You're cowards. You're incredible cowards. The Japanese government's evacuation orders will be officially lifted from Fukushima, but just 10% of 0.9 square kilometers. You can't go crossing the street or something. A couple of stories like that came out. Fact check team, the case for nuclear energy. There were several stories that came out like that. 100% lies. Recently there were calls for transition from coal and oil to cleaner energies, and some think nuclear power. No, just lobbyists will say that. Nobody thinks it. Nobody actually believes it. Nuclear scientists don't believe it. The lobbying groups don't believe it, but that's their job to say it. The National Desk Fact Check Team. It's Fox, for God's sakes. Rupert Murdoch. This type of energy is as dangerous as some say. Really? And instead of getting facts, you just come out with nonsense. It's really, you can't ignore it. Often when people think about nuclear, they think of disasters, but it's actually zero emissions. They're hemorrhaging radiation from the fuel pools alone, for God's sakes, all day long. What's the point of media? We really should get rid of all media. It's pointless. Well, it's good if you're a lobbying group, I suppose, but you're not going to help humanity or your communities or your country or anybody else on the planet or the species. Nuclear energy is the energy inside the core, the nucleus of an atom. It generates power through fission, which is the process of splitting the atoms. Yeah, they're not going to go away for millions, and uranium doesn't go away for millions and millions and millions of years. It never stops splitting the atom. Like, it's confusing for people to say. So you split these atoms that never go away. You create energy, heat, by doing that. And that they use that energy to boil water. You can put 2 million atoms on the head of a needle, but you can't see it. So how many atoms do you need to split to boil enough water to power 1 million homes for one day? The numbers, there's no mathematical equation to really... It's more than all the grains of sands and all the beaches on the planet each day of atoms released into the environment from each fuel pool. That's why the insects have disappeared. That's why all the species are dying. That's why there's no bacteria or fungus in your forest. This is why your forest fires are so vicious, because the litter and the debris in the forest doesn't break down because there's no fungus, no bacteria. The heat released, by the way, you're liberating the atoms back into the environment with forest fires because you can't destroy them. The heat release creates steam that spins a turbine when they generate electricity without those harmful byproducts released by fossil fuel. Excuse me. I'll fix it. Hang on. Every time you hear the word carbon free, you just want to grab somebody and start choking them. I got a simple way though. What the hell is that? Hang on. I got to do this the hard way. I put 4 letters in. Oh, here we go. All nuclear power plants have a dirty secret. They need 2 external plants to operate. So they got oil, gas, or coal plants. You need 2 of these to run a nuclear power plant. And so these emissions don't go very far and they land again, right? So if you don't build them in the communities, they're fine. It's as simple as that. Byproducts released by fossil fuel. Okay. Which is carbon, which plants can't live without. Let's not make it easy. Hang on. Because that's the problem with the truth. The truth, you can't rush the truth. You can try to rush the truth, but unfortunately you can't rush the truth. Let me try to explain to you. Okay, so let's go back to the emissions, harmful byproducts released by fossil fuel. Well, here's 2 well-known terrorists. One's a nuclear scientist, the other one's the shoe bomber. Now, the terrorist over here, the nuclear scientist, is going to tell you the stuff from a nuclear reactor is the same as walking in sunshine, or from rocks, or from potassium from bananas, or from potatoes. But your Geiger counter, if you take a Geiger counter, potatoes and onions and bananas are not going to set it off. The sunshine is not going to go set it off. But if you take your Geiger counter and these ships are driving across the ocean, throwing fuel into the ocean, your Geiger counter is going to... They're in such a hurry to get it off these ships, they'll actually kill people underneath it rather than leave it on the ship. That if your potato truck tips over, you can go to the graveyards. If your nuclear tips over, you can go to your graveyards every 7 years, maybe. If your potato truck tips over, your potassium product tips over, you don't got to pick up 30 million one-ton bags of radiation fallout because it doesn't work that way. If you compare 30 million one-ton bags from a single meltdown to 500,000 tons of sulfur from coal, 300 tons from oil, 2,000... Now, the 300 tons from oil is used in those big container ships. 15 container ships produce more pollution than all the cars on the planet combined. If I bury the equivalent potassium in the ground, it means nothing. This stuff will pollute the water tables for millions of years, and they're doing it all over the world. These bags, if you put one of these bags in the back of a pickup truck, is 1-ton bags, right? There's 30 million up to 60 million. But say 30 million is five rows of traffic, bumper to bumper, right around the planet of 1-ton trucks. So if your truck tips over, you don't have to go spray it with reagents. And these people would have died that day with their paper suits on, or that hour that are spraying on the fuel pellets. You don't leave these toxic sites behind with natural stuff, only with uranium. And uranium uses incredibly carbon-intensive equipment just to make it, let alone to run it per mile. The whole process after you get it out of the ground, first off, this is chemical ponds. Natural stuff, you don't end up with chemical ponds. Then to process it down into actual fuel, the amount of toxic left over from it is it's a planet killer. You got 15,000 abandoned uranium mines in the Navajo countries. You can't drink the water in any of these communities because of uranium. From just the yellow cake, there's two types of yellow cake, by the way. They like to say they trick you, right? There's yellow cake from breaking down the iron ore and reclaiming uranium in the original mining. But there's yellow cake, they call it from after the chain reaction. That's the stuff they turn into depleted uranium munitions. There's all pictures of Hanfords. Rusty 45-gallon drums in wet ground. How long before those 45-gallon drums start to leak their radioactive sludge? And how long before these cardboard boxes will release their radioactive sludges? They took all their nuclear weapons. It was around 55,000, by the way. Each one of these dots are Nebraska missile silos, Colorado, and Wyoming. They're in little communities, and they're holding the communities as human shields by doing that, by the way. Every facet of the nuclear industry is how can we stab everybody in the back. Chernobyl, 3 million children with permanent disabilities. If you tip over your potassium potatoes or whatever truck, you don't have to abandon your supermarkets, your hospitals, your schools, your communities forever. Nuclear is a curse. It's a plague. It's a disease. Excuse me. Active state role key to evacuation plans for a nuclear emergency. Residents protest in front of the Shimane prefecture government office in Matsu on June 2nd after the governor gave his consent to restarting the number 2 reactor at the Shimane nuclear power plant. The event of a major accident at the only nuclear power plant located in the prefecture's capital is assumed that the local residents would have to flee to neighboring prefectures. Now, is there really a stupider statement than that? Is there Like, if your power plant breaks down, you got to leave, not just your community, but your prefecture. Which in America is like a state, or in Canada like a province. And you better know which way the wind's blowing. It doesn't make any sense that they exist. The central government, as well as the relevant local administrations, are obliged to ensure the people living around the plant can be safely evacuated. They're not experts. They're not nuclear academics. They don't know nothing about it. They're the worst people in position. The Nuclear Regulation Authority endorses the safety of the reactor, saying it fulfills the standards, which is the non-regulatory commission. They don't regulate anything. They're controlled opposition, and the only interest they have at heart is theirs and the nuclear industry. The reactor will come on stream for the first time since January 2012. The government's office, along with the prefectural police department headquarters and the plant's off-site center, emergency response facility, are responsible for spearheading efforts to deal with the nuclear accident. The unqualified. But it's not clear whether they could properly perform their roles, as they're all located too close, within 10 kilometers of the facility. They're going to have to evacuate too. Only an alternative facility for substitute for the off-site centers during an emergency is located further from the plant. An emergency response plan envisions almost 500,000 or so local residences in 2 different prefectures are expected to be evacuated, among them 49 municipalities in Hiroshima also, and Okayama prefectures. The definition of stupid seems to only apply to nuclear, really. It's so stupid. Every facet of this industry is literally stupid. I got no concept of why it exists. It's a disease factory within 100 miles of it. But and they're surrounded by farms. Go watch the beginning of my last video. You really want to get a wake-up call. I'm afraid to go to supermarkets anymore, for God's sakes. I don't go to supermarkets without my glasses and a magnifying glass. When it comes home, everything gets a Geiger counter. Not just, no. A Geiger counter sits on it for about a half an hour. I'm not paranoid, I'm frightened to death. But would this plan still work in the event of a severe nuclear accident occurring simultaneously with a natural disaster like an earthquake, torrential rain, heavy snowfall, typhoons? No. If you got heavy snowfall, how are you going to evacuate? Municipality assembly in Hiroshima Prefecture is expected to accept 7,000 of the victims, but they might have to evacuate too. Blessed evacuation plan as riddled with problems in March and passed a resolution calling for the reactor not to be restarted until the lives and the safeties of the local residents are guaranteed. I mean, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are not supposed to exist. These were bomb craters from nuclear detonations. They're the last places you should build a community. The nuclear industry wanted the community there to study the survivors, to get them to move back, to study their offsprings like guinea pigs, which we covered those academic studies they have done for 76 years. Citizens in 4 cities with a 30-kilometer radius petitioned the mayors for an ordinance to hold a local referendum on whether the reactor should be allowed to resume operations, while the petitions were all voted down by municipal assemblies. The petitions were all voted down by the people you voted to protect you. The moves clearly reflect deep-rooted anxiety among the victims about the safety of the disease factories known as nuclear power plants. The nuclear plant is not the only one facing problems over the lack of efficient evacuation plans on top of that. And evacuation plans are not covered by the safety inspection experts at the NRA. So the NRA doesn't have nothing to do with evacuation plans. What a coincidence that must be. With regards to decisions to restart, because they don't want the literature on their sites, see? The central government has repeatedly, because the holes will be in that, it'll be shocking. The central government repeatedly said that it respects the judgment of the NRA. That doesn't have any say into it. The non-regulatory association also justified the decision to bring oil reactors back online, pointing out they're supported by the local governments concerned. No, they put the pro-nuclear community in positions of authority. The intentions of local communities should, of course, be respected. The central government should not default on its own responsibility for ensuring nuclear plants operate safely, given that it has been promoting nuclear power generation as a national policy. Right, because the central government should not default on its own responsibility for ensuring nuclear plants operate safely because they have been promoting nuclear power as a policy. So they're the very opposite of people that you would want to have in charge. A district court ordered the suspension of Japan's atomic power company Tokai No. 2 nuclear power plant, Tokai Ibaraki Prefecture, citing a lack of reliable evacuation planning. So they're all too close to do their job. Lost tapes from Chernobyl showed a haunting fallout nuclear disaster. So apparently, I think it's Netflix, and everything was documented. First off, if you go look up on my site, you'll see presentations on just Chernobyl with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I think the last one was 600 studies. Academic studies about Chernobyl. Chernobyl changed the sex ratio of all the males and females in Europe, for God's sakes. This is a new movie coming out, apparently. They call it the deadliest nuclear accident of all time. Again, the minute you hear that, you lose faith in them, right? If they're not going to be honest, and they're not, calling it the deadliest accident in history is absurd. It's brutal, don't get me wrong. Go look at the presentations they've already done on it, but it ain't the deadliest. Yeah, go watch that study, that presentation right there. Chernobyl nuclear meltdown, 36 years of misery. The nuclear scumbag show. Lost tape from Chernobyl shows the haunting fallout of the nuclear disaster. This is a new HBO. Will be starting 2 days ago on YouTube. I went over and looked at it. I left a comment, of course. You might want to check out my video on Chernobyl. I was surprised it showed up on their site, really. As more people have been exposed to Chernobyl radiation and fell sick, over 600 helicopter pilots died right away. You're not going to see that on Wikipedia. Wikipedia is disgusting, by the way. Their omissions are just, wow. Chernobyl reactor explosion killed 2 plant workers and 29 more people. That's what you'll see at Wikipedia. It's absurd to suggest it. It's outrageous to say it. It's a complete betrayal. And that's the United Nations narrative. That same person also wrote another article in 2019 that we covered too. Which nuclear disaster was the bigger disaster, Chernobyl, Fukushima? So they had, what's his face from the Union of Unconcerned Scientists? Where is he to? Yeah, Edwin Leidman. This disgusting parasite saying that Chernobyl is working worse from the Union of Unconcerned Scientists. And he does it a lot in this one story where he claims Chernobyl is worse. He said Fukushima was no major releases. So he's saying that's not real over there, that this is real, see? I think people like that should be put in jail for the rest of their natural life. I think to come out and tell the lies that Edwin Layman is unconscionable to come out and lie to him. And then they only acknowledged, again, the strontium and cesium, claiming that Fukushima was irrelevant compared to Chernobyl. It's just a horrific, degenerate betrayal. I'm not going to put you through it because it's 100% lies. Chernobyl, 1 nuclear reactor exploded. Fukushima, 3 reactors. They claimed that they didn't breach the containment. Right? So they're claiming that these buildings didn't get destroyed like that in order to make their narrative work. Chernobyl, and they're showing you a picture from a movie on top of that. Look at that. And Mindy, who wrote the story, holds an MFA in film from Columbia University, who knows nothing about nuclear. So Leibman wrote the story. Yeah, jeez. The nuclear crank from Oxford, Wade Allison. Anybody who's not familiar with Wade Allison is a notorious nuclear crank. He's a revolting parasite, and he claims that the radiation from nuclear meltdown is good for your health. Oh, did you know that he was a founding member of the Science for Accurate Radiation Information? You ever heard tell of that group before? I got one guy from it. Let me see if I can find him. He's a real work of art. Let me see if we can find that kooky whack job from Japan. My luck, I won't be able to spot him because I have so much. But hey, just give me a minute. Not like I can rush this stuff, right? I got in there somewhere. Just give me a second, see if I can find him. He's a 100% parasite. You'll probably remember if I can find him. And my luck, I won't find him, eh? Which is probably a good thing, because he always pisses me off when I hear his voice. There's so many of these people, too, is the scary thing. Yeah, I'm not going to find him. Which is lucky you, really, because... Here he is. Now, people were doing a presentation on Fukushima. It's better if we don't worry about Fukushima, he says. I'll adjust the volume.
Krishna, a freelance writer for Yuka Fuji, and I'm a generous member of the Scientists for Accurate Radiation Information.
So he's a Scientist for Accurate Radiation Information, which is Wade Allison's group. Let's do it again.
Krishna, a freelance writer for Yuka Fuji, and I'm a generous member of the Scientists for Accurate Radiation Information I'm pro-nuclear power generation. Restart of the nuclear plants much more beneficial than worrying too much about the fact-finding or the...
Worry too much about fact-finding. Here's what I put there. The students taught by evil Dr. Wade Allison should get their money back and have to be recertified. Allison is a well-known, notorious, kooky nuclear crank, and the claim that man-made radiation is beneficial is the same as murder. He's a serial killer. But his students should have to get their money back and get recertified. Again, study cast doubt on small modular reactors. This new scaled. Research included most small modular reactors will actually increase the volume of nuclear waste. But they don't actually tell you the information. So if you go to the original story, by intermediate waste, 35 times more intermediate waste than a large reactor. 5 times more reactor fuel because they're not efficient. And long-lived is 30 times more radiation than a large reactor. And it was omitted from the story. We're almost through, folks. I apologize. See, we had a spam bot show up. Dana Nasana predicted it would be a longer show tonight. It's only 3.5 hours. We're almost through it. My back is shot at this stage. I move everything in on Tuesday. I'm out of this place. So tomorrow I'll move the majority of it in. It'll probably all get moved out by tomorrow night. Canton to test outdoors warning siren systems today. A typical nuclear plant has 100 sirens because of activists has forced them. But these sirens are tested every month, I think. There's little children all over the place. Mommy, why are the sirens going off? Tests will be cancelled due to severe weather because they also use these sirens now for severe weather. So they denigrate the actual purpose of the sirens. Oh. Severe winds of 75 miles per hour, tornadoes, the sirens are also used. Well, they're not going to use it for a nuclear accident, so they might as well use it for something, Dana. That's true. The Martin Doctrine with much less risk. I don't even remember what that story was about. Remember those climate changes that were not expected to happen? Oh, that's the propaganda machine. They're happening. Our world leaders must immediately come together and do everything possible to mitigate climate change. They're the people. Look, climate change is caused by radiation fallout. Decades and decades of it on top of that. That model is Fukushima, so is this model. And it covers the whole planet immediately, and that's permanent. Pulsing energy almost at the speed of light from the bottom of the ocean to the upper tropospheres or higher. For millions of years, pulsing energy, killing everything on top of that. That's climate change. Gas, coal, and oil emissions is not climate change. The best way, and this is the last story, by the way, the best way is to deal with angry customers. People are increasingly exploding over seemingly everyday annoyances. Are increasingly exploding. You probably notice it doesn't take much to set people off these days, particularly those working in the airlines. There's also been a significant uptick in ugly altercations between neighbors, friends, domestic partners, according to the police. And the reason that is they bioaccumulate radiation from consumption because Japan's been shipping it out to all the supermarkets non-stop for 11 years. But now they got no holds at all, no checks. So people are bioaccumulating the radiation from all the farms around nuclear power plants, etc., on top of that. And you have lack of oxygen. And so you become very irrational. And that's the new norm. And so we predicted this many years ago, because of Fukushima. In the near future, you would see an escalation of short-tempered, of violent, particularly in airplanes, because you have less oxygen, because they use exterior air for oxygen on planes, right? Which means you're going to be infiltrated with man-made radiation in those planes at a worse rate. So the nuclear industry came out swinging a night. 12% says that smoke detectors are... Should smoke detectors using evil man-made nuclear americium-241 be banned and recalled? An amazing 12% showed up tonight, which is extraordinary, and said no. Thank goodness 88% said, yeah, that's a fact. And it should be. There's no reason to have nuclear waste in your homes. Everybody that's got those smoke detectors should consider, if they can afford it, to replace them with non-americium-241 and send the smoke detector back to the factories. Everybody should be promoting that on their social medias to their friends. Say, hey, by the way, you should send that smoke detector back to the factory when you're finished with it. It's got nuclear waste in it, see? In fact, I'm going to put up a t-shirt for that because they spam me for 12%. That deserves a t-shirt for the rest of my life of get smoke detectors out of your home now movement. I'll have a link under my video for the next show. I can't believe we made it through this one. That was a long show tonight. My back is shot. I'm busted up anyway, so what's the odds? I've been sick for 2 days, barely get off the couch. Brutal, man. It's been a tough 2 weeks for me, my God. What a nasty 2 weeks it's been. We got to raise money. We raised 120 on Thursday with James Lucid. Bless your heart. And that gets us really close to getting caught up. Tomorrow, I guess, I'm going to try to move the rest of it. I can. They're still in there. See, the problem is, this is a completely new renovated spot. So it's going to have new fridge, new stove, new washer and dryer. And so I'm really fortunate, right? It's got all new floors, new walls, all new insulation, properly done, etc., etc. It's not a very big spot, but it's a lot cheaper. And it's a better spot anyway, as far as now, right? So it works out for the better. Unfortunately, right, I'm not very healthy, and so doing this has killed me, literally kills me. And I still got to set everything up, and I'm so busted up here right now, I can barely stay still in my chair. And does this chair tilt, I wonder? I don't remember. Oh, it drops down, that's for sure. Whatever. All right. Let me get that back up a bit. There we go. I think we got it. And so when I update this stuff to you folks, the industry is also accumulating the information, right? And so that's horrifying because you don't want to give them information. But I'm worried about the planet. I'm worried about the species. I'm not worried about it. I'm terrified of what the nuclear industry got done to us all. Thank you, John Shiflett. I finally got his name right. Don Vincent, Albert, Dana Nasana. Thank you, Dana, again tonight. Shane Clark. Good night, everybody. And everybody that is already gone through will come back some other time and catch the rest of it. And because it's an exceptionally long show tonight, peace where Port Angeles. But I mean, there's so many stories, you don't want to let them get away with it. James Lucid, once again, James, thank you, my friend. Bless your heart. Oh, my back is hurting so much, man. I actually got, what's the word for it? Spasms in my back here right now. Adrian Johnson, what did Adrian say about Paladin? Yeah, shut it down. That's right. It's shut down, yeah. It's just they got all the nuclear, the Holtec is there. I think that story was about Holtec. And then Thursday shows us we can't trust Holtec. You had Price Anderson, which is where they took away the ability to hold the nuclear industry accountable. Kevin Blanche says Dana's anti-nuclear marathon. Well, I won't get another show in until Wednesday night or probably Thursday. I'll try to get on. If we got internet connection, I'll get on. I'll be up here on Wednesday night by the looks of it. They'll have the internet turned back on. I'm not going to be able to finish calling out everybody because my back is doing spasms. John Curtis, I'll try for a little tiny bit longer to go up through the names. Well, a lot of radiation do accumulate at the top of mountains from radioactive fallout. So you would find a lot of radiation up there because you get less rainfall up at the top of those huge mountains, right? More snow, so it packs in, and when the snow melts, you got a lot left over. I don't know. Things have changed since Fukushima. That's the one thing everybody got. When I'm talking about stuff, I'm putting that into the equation, right? So there's way more radiation to the atmosphere. Beckles for peace. My God, that's hilarious. Cracks me up. Okay, looks like I'm not going to get through it. Hugs for everybody. God bless everybody commented. Everybody's watching it or is watching it later. Jonathan, Snakes and Dragons. Ryan Underwood. I know there's a lot of people I don't remember. Colette is out there somewhere. Let's close the poll. The poll ends on 68 votes. 88% said the nuclear industry was a scumbag. That was the right answer. God bless you, folks. The wise person. God bless you. Robert. And I don't know if you noticed, but under my video, I updated under my videos. So now if you scroll all the way to the bottom, not that far, you'll notice that there's all kinds of way at my website. You can pay through Ideal and SEPA direct debit, Canadian pre-authorized debits. It accepts Visas, MasterCards, American Express, JCB payments, worldwide Apple Pay, Google Pay, Allpay, WeChat, Bank Contact, EPS. All of these are different ways you can donate from my website, from the link at my website. So I updated that. I can basically take money from anywhere on the planet for donations now. So the link at my site and my PayPal, Dana Durnford, right? That's directly donations to me. How you can, those two links. And above it was my merchandise shop. There's also a link at the top of my site. And the only way we can survive is if people support this. And I apologize to everybody, but if I don't try to raise the money to fund this, it falls apart. And so when you see me trying to raise money, it's because we're trying to keep this operation moving forward and on the attack against this horrific, disgusting betrayal. Because we have to do that, right? If we don't do it, nobody's going to do it to this capacity. Nobody's going to run an educational program. It's never going to happen. Just bear with me. I'm confused why, because normally I got to go click the allow embedding, but it stayed allow embedding. Whatever the hell that was all about. I always got to change that each night, right? But tonight has actually stayed in that I didn't have to go in and click it. Support Angeles. Good night, everybody. Let's call it a night. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you make it this far. We'll be back Wednesday. Don't forget to donate if you can. If you can't, don't have a credit card or something to donate, ask your friend and give them the money, get them to donate. Because till we get into the new place and straighten out, I don't see how else I'm going to keep the operation moving forward. I thought my internet bill was $70 a month. Turns out that's $90 a month. So I'm in hole for another $150 a them. And thank goodness they're not pressuring me for it. But I didn't know that because they didn't send me a bill, which is what they're supposed to be doing since I moved to this place. It used to be paper, and they were supposed to update it, right? But that's just one. At the end of the month, we got to do licensing for the boat trailer and the other trailer. And the next month, we got to do the site. And so, as extra monies we got to raise. Spring is still here. Summer hasn't showed up. And it's the 5th of June. It's absurd. Look at that spammer showed up. 1, 2, 3, 4 in a row. That's the industry, eh? God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody in the middle of the week, hopefully, if not Thursday. Have a great night and a great couple of days. We'll see everybody soon.